Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me well. My name is David Goddard, and I'm the Double Verify's Senior Director of Business Development in EMEA, responsible for expanding partnerships with digital media and technology companies. I'm also the Chair of the IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee, a multi-stakeholder group which aims to increase the understanding of the programmatic ecosystem, the impact it's having on digital advertising, and influence the industry via initiatives. One such initiative is the IAB Europe's Virtual Programmatic Day, which I want to thank you all for joining. As you all know, IAB Europe is the European level association for the digital marketing and advertising ecosystem. Through its membership of national IABs and media, technology and marketing companies, its mission is to lead political representation and promote industry collaboration across Europe. One of the ways we do that is by bringing people together through virtual events. Now in its 6th edition, the Virtual Programmatic Day is one of the largest events in the programmatic industry. With over 2,500 registrations for today's event, we wanted to thank you all for joining, especially during such uncertain times with COVID-19. We believe it's now more important than ever to continue collaborating, discussing, and innovating so we can sustain and develop our industry. Today, we have a stellar lineup of moderators and panelists in 4 sessions to discuss how the potential depletion of the third-party cookie could affect programmatic advertising, the latest in programmatic supply chain transparency, the impact of supply path optimization, and advertiser lessons learned from advertisers in-housing programmatic. Every speaker is a member of IAB Europe, so if you'd like more information on how to get involved with future events, we will be sharing details at the end. Before we kick off, we just wanted to establish the stakeholder breakdown of the audience. So if you wouldn't mind completing the poll, which has just popped up on your screen now, I will confirm the results shortly. I also wanted to highlight that each of you can be an active participant in today's Virtual Programmatic Day, as each panel will be followed by an audience Q&A. So if you have questions for today's panelists, you'll be pleased to know that you can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. In addition to the poll that you just completed, we'll also be launching a few polls to ascertain your opinion on specific topics throughout the event today. Again, we appreciate your participation in these. Right, thank you very much for completing the poll. Are the results in? Well, we'll give it a few minutes for the results. Maybe we'll announce the results. Oh, here we go. Advertisers, we've had 7% of the people logging on make up advertisers at the moment. Agencies make up 31% of the audience. Ad technology makes up 33% of the audience. Publishers, 18%. Fantastic, thank you very much. I don't think, oh, and we have 2% from media and press. Welcome on board. Thank you very much, everybody. I just repeat, advertisers 7%, agency 31%, ad tech 33%, publishers 18%, media and press 2%. Again, thank you all for joining. Now on to our first session. Are we entering a post-cookie world? It is a question on the mind of many in the industry. Thankfully, the next session will explore the potential depletion of the third-party cookie and propose a range of solutions that can be considered by all stakeholders. I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague Tanzel, who's a managing director in EMEA at Double Verify, who is moderating this hotly anticipated session. Over to you, Tanzel.
Thank you, David. Good morning, all. I'm really looking forward to talking about this particular topic. I think it's dear to our heart, has been for many, many years. The cookie has been around for as long as I can remember. And it's an interesting situation where, as an industry, we're having to consider the challenges that a post-cookie era could create, but also the opportunities. And essentially, that's the core discussion that we'll be having with the panelists that you see here. Before we get to the panel, I want to introduce Daniel Knapp, who's the Chief Economist at the IAB Europe, to take us through a little bit of his insight into where he thinks the post-cookie era is going to take us. Daniel, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tanzel, and a very warm welcome from me as well. I wanted to give you a brief overview of where we currently stand and what some of the key considerations are as we're moving towards lower dependence on third-party cookies, and as we as an industry are all hard-pressed to come up with other ideas and solutions on how targeting, addressability, the use of data, and engaging with audiences can look like. I do not want to spend too much time, but really just provide a whistle-stop tour and kind of summarize key arguments. So I've prepared a few slides, which I will share now. I do hope you can see my screen. Are the tides turning? We've been speaking since the dawn of programmatic about the idea of personalization, making ads more relevant. For 100 years, there has been that John Wanamaker claim that 50% of my ads are wasted, but I don't know which half. And we've always embraced this idea that personalization can fix all of this. And cookies have been a key infrastructure in fixing that issue. And indeed, it doesn't really come as a surprise, and maybe even fairly late if you think about it, that the ANA coined personalization as the marketing word of the year in 2009. But that was on December 4th. And just a couple of days later, Gartner, the analyst company, predicted that marketers, a vast majority of them, will abandon personalization by 2025. So is there some kind of personalization fatigue going on, or is this concept, which was a holy grail for the marketing industry, is it somehow under siege? And I think when we speak about third-party cookies, it's very easy, in particular from an industry association perspective, to fall into a technical debate. We need to understand the wider context, the deal, the relationship we as an industry have to our audiences, and that all the different parties and partners in the industry, the B2B partners, have towards each other. We need to critically interrogate how could and should personalization be possible in this new era? And isn't the rise of the third-party cookie area also a criticism and a force for the industry to do some introspection to see what went wrong in the past and how can we provide more sustainable addressability in a more sustainable way of dealing with data and our audiences? And indeed, when I did some research on this, I think Mighty Hive presented a very, very nice kind of timeline on how the privacy narrative has evolved over time. And I took the liberty to expand on this type of visualizing things and highlight to you kind of a couple of milestones. Now, the industry is, of course, and we'll hear from Google in a second, really focused on the demise of third-party cookies within Chrome, a 2-year process, as the critical watershed moment. The moment where we are all thinking, scrambling about rebooting things. But if we look at our panel, we already have panelists on there who've, for much longer than this announcement, thought about how the future of the cookie, how the future of targeting could look like. And this privacy first area, as I would call it, has been in the making for quite some time. And there are just a few landmark events that you see on this timeline which have led to the moment where we are. It didn't come out of nowhere. We had data breaches, we had data scandals, we had regulators involved, we had the industry themselves, browser providers, browser manufacturers provide changes in how targeting should be. We had tech companies, with ad tech companies step in and say, we need to change the way in which we do targeting. So all these things kind of have led up to a new world, a new reality that we are all trying to figure out how is it going to look like, what future approaches to personalization can we think about. Right now, there are many solutions, many ideas, but in a sense, there are more questions than answers. And the key thing is we don't really know how in particular on the Google side, the new world is going to look like. There are a few things that we already know, and I really look forward to Google's perspective on this in a second. But if we go to chromium.org, the key kind of repository where all things Chrome are being discussed, we can see a couple of things. Fundamental for the future will be the privacy sandbox, where we're moving towards a decentralized way of storing data, away from a centralized database to data and also calculation, computation on data being done locally in the browser and on the device. And around that, we can see very, very different types of analysis, analytics, and targeting options emerging predominantly through APIs. Many of those are work in progress and ideas and concepts and nothing that is firm, but it already highlights, if you look around what's on the screen, a couple of new ways of thinking about data, where it's less about identifying the individual, but using machine learning approaches, using statistics to create new segments and to do privacy compliant inference. And all of these APIs are embedded in what's now emerging, what's being discussed, a new privacy model for the web, about how should identities be resolved and what level of access and what level of granularity should be available. Now, while this is happening on the Google side, there are many other things the industry is already doing, a whole array of approaches, old and new, on how in this post-third-party cookie world, targeting and addressability could look like. We see a resurgence of contextual targeting. We're seeing a massive launch of IDs, in particular publisher-centric IDs. So just today, news broke, for instance, that Axel Springer joined NetID, the big German publisher first-party ID association. We got measurement companies launching new panels, and we're also thinking about new types of ML approaches. And you can see how, when we think of contextual, for instance, as an example, it's more than just back to 1998 before we had the programmatic world. We see a couple of companies here and some kind of makeshift Lumascape that really illustrate the diversity of different approaches, from pure play contextual to something that is about brand suitability. You saw acquisitions on the space, particularly on the right side, something on video, and also very, very different, again, statistics and machine learning based approaches to understand context better. And the interesting thing is that many of these approaches come from Europe. We in Europe had a particularly, of course, stringent regulatory environment, which forced companies to think differently, to come up with new approaches. I think it's reflected in this new contextual landscape. We also see, we look at the ID landscape, just as an example, this is non-exhaustive. However, it highlights a few trends. We see often extremely locally driven, local and publisher-led initiatives, from NetID in Germany to the Swiss ID. Some are just publisher-centric, others are expanding beyond publishers to a broader group of industry participants, and others are extremely lean, because in some senses, publisher IDs, publisher consortia, they have a mixed history. Mixed history in the sense that some, due to governance issues, didn't work out in the past, so some countries adopted a much more linear approach. We see on the right side of this slide also many other approaches from the IAB. We see some first-party approaches and some unified ID solutions from very, very different providers in the industry, just to show you how much is kind of out there. But in all of this environment, whatever wins or what combination of approaches actually will gain traction, I think the marketer's to-do list is changing. They also need to move away from third-party cookies and move towards first-party IDs and build those in a compliant manner. And that means that analysis and insight are becoming much more important for them. It also means the industry needs new skill sets. We've often thought about data-driven skills, predominantly in the programmatic domain, and this is the Virtual Programmatic Day. But I think it's clear that if you look at advertisers' first-party data and the onboarding, that very, very different skills are required, and that the MarTech and the AdTech world are fusing much more together. The ability to combine programmatic knowledge with data analytics and CRM knowledge, and also how does the cloud function, how can I use data in the cloud, is becoming critical to unlock value of insight. And lastly, to conclude, I think all of this also shows that we need a shift in mindset. On the left, you see one of the earliest slides myself as an analyst did in 2009 on the programmatic world. And we see it's not really working like that anymore. And we've always thought about marketing in the last years as a science, but we need to think beyond that. It's not just a science. Data isn't just personal data, but it goes beyond that. We need to look beyond just the behavioral stream of data and think of other ways of thinking of audiences. We need to move away from certainty to approximation, but we have new tools to make that smarter. And despite all of this uncertainty, I believe that we have a historical chance now in the marketing industry, in particular in Europe, to set the foundations for a sustainable way of dealing with data and a sustainable way of understanding and interacting with audiences, finding a common language with other media, and also find the right balance from a regulatory perspective and a compliance perspective, and to create a level playing field where all parties can interact and transact and where data is moving out of silos. So with these introductory remarks, I would like to close and hand back to you, Tanzel, to introduce our panel. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you for the slides and the data, Daniel. Very interesting. I think it's interesting as an industry. We've always seen ourselves a little bit cyclical, and how the post-cookie world is already shaping up to learn from its past and sort of reborn some of the older technologies and the older way of doing things in a new ecosystem, but also leveraging some of the future technologies and how those two worlds will come together. I think is an interesting point to discuss later on in the panel. Before we do that, I want to introduce Sharon. I want to introduce Sharon Marshall. She's the Director of EMEA Partnerships and Solutions for the Data Trust at Google. She's going to sort of give us a little bit more insight into the Google sandbox, I hope. But as far as Google is in advancing web privacy, Sharon, over to you.
Okay, I hope everyone can see my screen okay and can hear me. Thanks very much, Tanzel, and thanks to the IAB team for inviting me to speak about Google's vision for web privacy today. What I would like to talk to you about is the reasons why Google wants to build a more privacy-safe web and do that together, and the steps for sharing your feedback and how you can collaborate in the process. So you heard previously, it's not news to anyone here that the ecosystem we all operate in is changing and has been changing for some time. Users are expecting more from us. For example, even in Google in 2019, we saw on average 20 million visits per day to the Google account. And the Google account is where users can choose and adjust their privacy settings across all Google products. So we can see that user demand for additional privacy has led to both increased regulation and stepped up controls from browsers. The industry is shifting to meet these higher expectations and impacting the ways data is collected and shared in the digital advertising industry today. These changes create new and important considerations for digital marketers and publishers. So we need to ensure the web can evolve to better respect user privacy, and at the same time, we need to ensure the web continues to support core business models that keep it working for everyone. But the same technologies which allow relevant ads, measure web traffic, or prevent fraud can also be used for unwanted tracking across the web. And primarily, we're talking about third-party cookies and covert tracking methods such as fingerprinting. So while users can control cookie-based tracking through browser settings, for example, they can't actually opt out of fingerprinting and often have no way to know it's even happening. And neither of these mechanisms is private by default. So it's really time for the web community to do more to respect user privacy and choice. At Google, we believe that abruptly blocking third-party cookies without replacement solutions would weaken the business models that fund quality content and keep the web widely accessible to users. It would also encourage more developers to resort to covert tracking workarounds such as fingerprinting. Google's approach aims to replace legacy practices with new privacy-preserving solutions. Now that means finding ways now to improve cookie security and choice for users while we work on building privacy-safe alternatives to cookies. So just to take you through some of the key areas of focus that we're looking at. So improving privacy and security of cookies by partitioning first-party and third-party cookies and providing more granular controls for users. This is what we're referring to as same site, which I'm sure you've probably heard of. Chrome had planned to roll out this fully at the beginning of the year, however made the decision to temporarily roll back to ensure stability and avoid any distractions for websites during the COVID-19 crisis. But we do anticipate the rollout will resume later this year. While that's happening, we want to build privacy-preserving alternatives to third-party cookies to enable key advertiser and publisher use cases. And only when these solutions are in place, then phase out support for third-party cookies. Obviously, first-party cookies will remain unaffected. We also want to develop protections against covert tracking alternatives that I mentioned earlier, such as fingerprinting. The privacy-preserving solutions that I just referenced are what we're calling Chrome's Privacy Sandbox. I'm sure many of you have heard of this initiative already, and it's Chrome's way of championing the development of new web standards for privacy. It includes the creation of new technologies that support key web use cases without identifying users across sites, along with efforts to mitigate covert tracking workarounds by limiting passive data collection. When the new privacy-preserving solutions are in place and meeting the needs of the ecosystem, then Chrome intends to phase out support for third-party cookies. So the Privacy Sandbox has proposals aiming to address use cases, including measurement, relevance, fraud detection, and anti-covert tracking methods. I want to point out that the focus is on use cases because the objective is to achieve end goals. So for example, delivering relevant ads to users, but in a manner that preserves user privacy, not replicate every practice that exists today, because some of today's practices don't meet user expectations for privacy. All of Chrome's proposals to date, if you want to have a look at them, are listed on the Privacy Sandbox page of chromium.org. The Privacy Sandbox proposals are being refined through the public web standards process alongside privacy proposals offered by other parties. And each proposal will move through the web standards process separately. As these proposals are very early in the idea phase, or some of them very early, some might change substantially during this process or be replaced, and Chrome will continue to offer proposals to address additional use cases. And this initiative, is important to know, is not limited to Chrome or to Google. Other parties are offering their own privacy proposals as well, some of which Chrome will support or provide feedback on. And we want to invite the entire web community, browsers, technology companies, industry representatives and others, to help refine Chrome's ideas and also propose their own. The discussions around proposals submitted by Chrome and other members of the community are happening within the open forums of the World Wide Web Consortium, or otherwise known as W3C. This is generally how consensus is achieved for new web standards and how the best and most complete solutions are developed. Now, at this early stage, most organizations mainly want to stay informed, but you can decide the role you want to play in this process, and we encourage you to be as engaged as you want to be. You can stay informed by following developments, as I mentioned, on chromium.org, or read the Privacy Sandbox proposals on GitHub. If you have specific feedback to raise, you can comment directly on the Privacy Sandbox proposals in GitHub, or join one of the W3C communities or business groups. You can also engage through your industry associations, such as the IAB, who are already engaging with the process directly and are already members of the Improving Web Advertising Business Group. As the solutions proposed by Chrome and others become available for testing, you can experiment with them on your own or with partners in a more structured and collaborative model. And finally, if you do see a use case that needs to be addressed and have the domain expertise to propose a new solution yourself, you can get more deeply engaged in the web standards process. So I hope this has been helpful and shown you a little bit about how we're thinking about the web more private for everyone. And so I'm going to hand back now to Tanzil for the panel.
Thank you, Sharon. Very interesting. As I left Google two and a half years ago, I think a lot of this was in ideation phase. So it's good to see a lot of it coming to fruition. So moving on to the panel, I want to introduce, obviously, we've heard from Daniel and Sharon. If you have anything further to do to introduce yourselves, then please do. But I'm going to ask everybody on the panel to introduce themselves. I suppose if we can go through in the order that we've got on the screen, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ben Hancock, Global Head of Programmatic Trading at CNN International, where I've been for about 5 years now.
Yeah, hi, I'm Richard Sharp. I'm one of the Senior Directors in Europe for Oracle Data Cloud, who are a data and technology company that helps publishers, advertisers, brands, agencies and platforms to better optimize their advertising on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to IAB for having me. My name's Sarah Vincent. I work for Index Exchange, and my team heads up the publisher strategy teams across EMEA.
Good morning. I am Matthew Roche, the CEO and one of the founders of ID5. ID5 is a technology company building a privacy-first, cookieless identification solution for digital advertising.
Thank you. Daniel, did you want to say something before we get started?
Just to say hi again. So I'm Chief Economist at IAB Europe. Just maybe to say how I look at this. I've been an industry analyst for kind of the last decade, and I'm observing trends that shape the digital industry. So I'm taking kind of some impartial view during this discussion.
Fantastic. I suppose, given Sharon, you're the only one who's not introduced yourself. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can do that again. Hi, I'm Sharon Marshall. Obviously, you just heard I work at Google. I'm in the EMEA Partnership Solutions team and run a team that's very much focused on building data trust with our key partners.
Thank you all. So, in order to set the scene a little bit, the title of this panel is the post-cookie era. So I want to open up to the panel. I'll pass the mic to individuals as we go along. So the first question, I suppose, is, as an industry, as we prepare for the depletion or the demise of the third-party cookie, what opportunities and challenges do you think are created for the industry? Whether that's direct or programmatic. Let's start with Sharon. Given you've just done your presentation, I think it follows very nicely.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tanzil. So I think that there's challenges already with cookies today, and I think that's important to think about because we've seen, as I mentioned, a decline in trust from users. We see people using ad blockers. We see them going into incognito mode. So I think that what we can see as an opportunity for is to find solutions and really rebuild trust with our users. As I mentioned, it's early stages, but it's really key that we invest now in privacy-preserving tech that will actually mean privacy-preserving alternatives to satisfy critical business models and use cases. And the industry, I think, really has the opportunity to make meaningful improvements and set high standards across the whole web. So there's a really big opportunity for us to come together, and do this together. It's going to be challenging and it's going to require industry-wide collaboration. And so, this is why we've set out a longer timeline, because we're really not expecting this to happen overnight. But we think that if we work together as an industry, we can really set high standards for the future.
Thank you. Matthew.
Yes. So we have to remember that user identification is one of the foundations of digital advertising. We've been using third-party cookies to identify users since the beginning of digital, and it's not been working particularly well, but it's been working. And over the past few years, we've started to face several kind of issues, growing issues. One is the efficiency issue, right? As I said, third-party cookies. We've had match rates issues. We've had kind of discrepancy issues. And that's been limiting the efficiency of the open web and programmatic for brands and publishers. So that's the number one issue. The new issues that have appeared over the past few years have been privacy regulation, because the ecosystem built on third-party cookies wasn't up to the standards that the regulators have imposed on us as an industry. And obviously the decision from the browsers, the unilateral decision from the browsers to shut down access to third-party cookies, which basically forces us to redesign the whole ecosystem. What we're talking about here really is a currency, is the ability to trade with each other, is the ability to connect a brand and a publisher so that they can use information that they have on either side to inform advertising, right? So it's a currency. We've been using third-party cookie IDs based on third-party cookie as a currency, as a mechanism to have a common framework to identify users. We don't have that anymore, right? So the challenge is, how do we redefine a currency? How do we redefine a trading mechanism so that we could continue to have brands engage with publishers on the open web in a manner that is more efficient, that is more respectful of privacy concerns and privacy regulations? So I think that's really the challenge we're faced with. I agree with Sharon, there are plenty of opportunities to do this better because, again, the previous ecosystem wasn't necessarily working well enough, and particularly for publishers. But this is what's at stake here, is how do we rebuild, how do we redefine the currency that enables us to trade with each other?
Great, thank you. Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think my opening statement would be that opportunities this brings far outweigh the challenges. That said, I'm absolutely very aware of the challenges that we will face as an industry, one of which being time. We have 20-ish months to kind of really come together and rethink how this is going to be approached. And as Daniel said earlier, you know, for example, Index has been thinking about this for a number of years, but we have to get to a point where now there's a timeline, there is really very much a call to action. So challenging, but also really exciting. And then in terms of the opportunities it brings, it as Matthew said, it's a time to really rethink the whole process. It's to use IAB's term, you know, it's like a re-architecture of the ecosystem and how it works. We're not looking to just replace, you know, the third-party cookie now. We should be thinking at, you know, let's look at the whole bigger picture. We have a real opportunity here to rethink and redo this system in a way that is absolutely user-centric, privacy-first, which it hasn't been in the past, and also would enable us to move into more deterministic, people-based marketing, which ultimately would improve the user experience.
Great, and Ben, from a publisher perspective, what do you think?
Yeah, hi Tanza, hi everyone. So I think I agree with what everyone said so far about this. This has been a part of a wider ongoing narrative that we've seen. You know, we've seen issues around real concern from consumers that they're being over-targeted on the web. That's led to the rise of ad blocking and to the browser wars where they've been restricting what cookies can do. So I don't think anyone's really overly surprised that we're where we are. I think when we look at it specifically from a publisher's perspective, what we've got to bear in mind that it's the third-party cookie that's going away. First-party cookies really aren't going anywhere. So I'm sure we'll come onto it in more detail, but I think really bear in mind that the publishers are going to be in a really strong place with this, because absolutely we can still use our data. And we can really build on the capabilities that we've already got.
Thank you. You know, I think it's interesting from an industry perspective. A lot of people associate third-party cookies to retargeting and a targeting function. But I think it's important for everybody to understand that third-party cookies apply to so many more things across the internet rather than just targeting. I mean, basic functions like frequency capping, attribution. Just general measurement is done through third-party cookies as well as targeting. And so, as we go through the rest of the panel and rest of the questions, it'd be great to get your opinions on the impact beyond targeting for the industry and some of the solutions that we think we could use. So, moving on to the next question, and to incorporate a question that we've had from Ben Geach. Retargeting has been such a huge part of marketing tactics for direct response brands for years. Without cookies, what's the alternatives to get similar conversion rates? So, ultimately, I suppose the question is, will it still be possible to deliver targeted advertising in a post-cookie era? And how do we think we can do that? Richard, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tanzel. Yeah, well, the short answer to that is yes, we will be able to do targeted advertising in a post-cookie, a third-party cookie era. It'll just be slightly different. Everything that everyone said in the previous question, I agree with completely. And there's tons of opportunity here. We're just all going to have to get a little smarter. I think that anyone that comes out and says they're surprised with what's happened here, I don't know where they've been for the last 10 years. So the companies and brands and the publishers that have been treating the relationship they have with their customers and their users as a long-term relationship are the ones that are set up for this, because it's all going to be, a lot of it's going to be about the use of first-party data and how you continue that conversation with them. Those that have not done that and have been doing far too much retargeting and treating their users as a resource rather than a relationship are the ones that are going to find this trickiest, are going to be the ones that are going to find this harder to match the revenues that they've been making from this, basically. But I do think that this is an exciting time, and we will be able to move forward through using targeting, first-party data firstly, but then also the excitement around things like context and those sorts of technologies that are out there.
Fantastic, thanks, Richard. Sharon.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Richard said, especially about sort of getting smarter with how publishers use first-party data, which a lot of them have a wealth of amazing first-party data. But I think it's important that the industry can still deliver relevant advertising that works well, not just for brands, but also for the consumers. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, we're seeing in the privacy sandbox that the proposals that have been submitted to forums and groups within the W3C, including from Chrome, but not just from Chrome, aim to support the core use cases. It might just look a little bit different. So use cases such as targeting, relevance and measurement are being developed for at the moment.
Great, thank you. Ben.
Yeah, hi. So I think absolutely it is going to change. I think when we look at this from a kind of the viewpoint of a publisher, if a lot of third-party cookies are going away, or third-party cookies are going away, that first-party data is going to become more and more important, and contextual advertising is going to become more important. So if you look at what we've done at CNN, for example, and this has been part of an ongoing strategy for a number of years now, it's really been to invest in content outside of our news content that we're more known for. So, for example, we've got great style content, fantastic business channel. So we can offer contextual opportunities around there. I think also the kind of technology around contextual targeting has got a lot better as well. I remember about, contextual targeting, or keyword targeting, as it was initially known, has been around for 15 years now. But we've got technology that really enables us to analyze our content semantically as well, so it can really analyze the full URL of a page and analyze the full text of a page as well, which is a really significant jump on. So I think we're going to see those technologies continue to develop, and that's how we're primarily going to offer this kind of targeting to our users. Also, we've got the ability to store our first-party data in a GDPR and privacy compliant warehouse as well, and then we can match that with other advertisers' first-party data and enhance both our data sets. So this is quite new, but I think that's a really exciting opportunity, and I really think we're going to see this grow in the coming years.
Great, thank you, Ben.
If I may just a quick
Sure.
comment, Tanzel. I think it's important to differentiate what we're talking about here. Data, whether it's first party, third party, is different from the identifier, the currency that we're using to connect the dots between buyers and sellers, right? It's always been super important for publishers and for brands to have access to their own data, because that's the data they control, that's the data they own, so it's cheaper, it's probably more specific to what they do, right? There are use cases for third party data. You cannot do prospecting on first party data by definition, right? So data is one thing. The currency, the method that we use to connect data with inventory is what we've been using third-party cookie for. Irrespective of the quality of data, this is the connection that we need, right? And this is what's at risk. It's not that the access to data is one of the applications of that currency. Frequency capping is another application. Performance attribution is another application, right? What's at risk is that currency, is that ability to link a brand and a publisher so that we can do all those things. The quality of data is something that comes on top of this ability. If we don't have this ability to connect, it doesn't matter what data you have access to. You cannot bring it to the brand or to the publisher you want to use it with. So I think it's really important to differentiate first-party IDs, third-party IDs from first-party data, third-party data.
Thank you for the clarification. I think it's a great point. Sarah, finally, your version, your opinion on whether it still be possible to deliver targeted advertising in a post-cookie era from an index.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the answer is 100%. The contextual piece is interesting. Obviously, there have been some developments in that field in the last 6 months, which I'm really pleased to hear, because I was on a panel about 8 months ago, and we were talking about, when third parties disappear, the buyers were sort of saying more around, we'll just move to contextual advertising. Which is a little bit blunt, but I'm hearing some really interesting feedback now from publishers that are, as you said, Ben, as well, that, you're thinking about how you can make contextual more relevant using, more audience segmentation, etc. So that's one way. The other way, and I feel let's not put too much focus on that. From the index point of view, we are much more focused on the people-based deterministic matching. And if we can facilitate the relationship building between the publisher and the consumer, you can deliver a much more targeted advertising experience for the user. So we've started doing this in the US. We've had some great success around buyers out there which have got their own CRM data, matching it to ID data that we're working with LiveRamp across certain publishers. And obviously match rates are incredible, relevancy is very high. And yeah, we're seeing the budgets grow on that. So the test case has been made, it's there and it works. It's just scaling it. And of course it does rely on a lot more data from publishers, which is kind of the next strategy for them as to how to obtain that and start building up their own graph.
I think, Tanzil, if I just may add, what's really important, just to elaborate on a point that Mathieu made, we need to think how data and how different sources of data can be combined, also and by whom, to facilitate an analysis. So we've talked about data, we've talked about matching, but we haven't really spoken about the analysis. How does it all generate insight and also then value? First point, if we look at the rise of first-party data right now, from a publisher side, that's great, but often publishers have a very limited view of who the audience, who the consumer really is beyond their own pages, which is why enriching this data, not just with advertiser data from the other side of the value chain, but also why building consortia or first-party consortia that go beyond publishers, for instance, include insurance, airlines, and so forth, is important to, first of all, increase the understanding of who the customer is. The second thing, when we look at a currency or the lack of a currency, it's the question, if you match publisher data and advertiser data, who controls the analysis? If this is done in the future in a cloud environment, for instance, is that going to be Google Cloud? Is it going to be AWS? Is it going to be Azure or someone else? And I think we need to consider the role of the cloud and the ability to match data in the cloud and have control and transparency over the processes, how that happens, as essential for the future, so that we can create a level playing field for all.
Thank you. I think it's sort of interesting. There's a need for the industry as a whole to reconsider what they're doing and how they're doing things. There's a question here from somebody on the webinar. Is it time for marketers and advertisers to rethink their KPIs? I think ultimately there's going to be a number of changes. So my next question is, what will be the key actions we need to take as an industry to ensure brands can still engage with their consumers through relevant but digital advertising. Daniel, do you want to continue with your train of thought?
I think relevance is a key topic, and we always thought that relevance means hyper-personalization. But the marketer is ultimately interested in the individual person. I actually think that's a misconception. The marketer cares about target groups, about customer groups and segments. These can be micro segments, very narrow, but the individual person matters less. So I think it's actually a healthy move now towards saying, hey, we want to analyze how advertising works on a more aggregated basis, but still draw meaningful inferences from that. And I think in that way, targeting can still work. There's going to be a move. So first of all, we had a move from averages to individuals. Now we had the Nielsen panels 14 to 49 to hyper-targeting individuals. That was really the promise of programmatic. But I think what we will be seeing now, supported by new ways of doing data analysis, is a move slightly away from the hyper-personalized from the individual to something more of an aggregate, not back to the world that we knew, but smarter aggregations and smarter segmentations that allows privacy compliant ways of understanding how consumers behave and how they react to advertising. So this is a combination of various factors of regulation, of consumer fatigue with advertising. Behavioral hasn't often worked as well as it should, and the innovation in new statistical methods to really do this accurately and to do that at scale.
Great, thank you. Sharon, be interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Daniel that things are going to shift and look a little bit different. And I think that this is where to talk again about sort of how we work together, because it's important that we really work together across the ecosystem, and that's something. I think that's an action that we need to take now to really create industry-wide standards. I mean, 10 years ago, you wouldn't imagine that we would be able to do that, but I think that the industry is mature enough now for us to really look at this together. I mean, it's really important that everyone engages in the conversation, because we're all part of this ecosystem together, and no one company or entity is going to be able to solve this on their own. I talked about Chrome so far, but as an industry, we need to aim for solutions that would really work across all browsers. And in my presentation earlier, I mentioned a few of those use cases that we're developing for at the moment. But actually, we actively really want people to point out use cases we haven't thought of, and we need everyone's input in that. And we really need to think about how we work together to keep users at the center of this conversation, because it's really important. Someone was talking about building long-term relationships, and it's important to build that trust with our consumers and our customers and ensure they understand the changes and what that means for them too.
It's an interesting point you raised, Sharon. Understand the changes. It sounds to me there's a real need for the industry, not just to talk to each other and talk at each other, but it's really just to educate. It's educate all constituents, from the consumer all the way up to publishers, advertisers, agencies, all the tech people, everybody in between. There has to be an open understanding. Matthew, I'd love to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah, fully agree about education. I'd like to come back to the point that Danielle was making earlier. Brands are not interested in individual consumers, they're interested in audience segments. And by and large, most of the cases have been segment level cases, right? With the exception maybe of retargeting, which can be considered more of a one-to-one type of approach. But apart from that, it's all about groups of users. The real question here, and the questions that we're faced with initiatives such as the privacy sandbox proposal by Chrome, is who defines the segments? Is it a Chrome definition, and we just get a group of users to work with, everyone has the same? Or do we want brands and publishers to be able to use individual user IDs to define the groups they want? And I think that's the main crossroad that we're at right now, right? And I believe that if we only allow brands and publishers to work with predefined groups of users, they'll be bringing a knife to a gunfight against the walled gardens. Because Google, in YouTube and in AdWords, isn't working cohorts. They're not working on segment, they're working on user level information. Same for Facebook, right? And so if all we give to brands and publishers to know their consumers, to address them in a customized way, to measure the performance of their action in a customized way is cohorts defined by someone else, they'll be really even in a more difficult competitive position versus the other destinations that brands have to put their money to, which is the walled gardens. So I think it's really important to understand this kind of crossroad that we're at. That being said, pushing user ID first. Sorry, Sarah, just give me one second to finish off. User IDs cannot be the user IDs we've had for the past 15 years. And so privacy first is non-negotiable, right? That's not an option. We need to include publishers, we need to include users in that conversation, and we need that relationship between publishers and consumers to be the basis of the identification system we're building for brands to be able to engage with consumers, right? We need to respect publisher user choices by design. And so those are really the values that I think are important. A, we need to have user IDs. Brands and publishers need to have user IDs because cohorts are not going to be good enough. Two, user IDs have to be privacy by design. The infrastructure has to be privacy by design because users have to be part of that discussion. Maybe we have to explain the value exchange in a better way, right? We have to let them understand that if they get access to content and services for free, it's because those services are supported by advertising, and advertising requires some level of understanding of what they do, right? But that relationship has to be at the basis of the infrastructure we're building.
Absolutely. Sarah, you're going to interject that.
Yeah, if I could just add, I mean, Matthew, you really kind of summed up how I was thinking in response to Daniel as well. You know, like better targeting on segments makes a ton of sense, and that would absolutely be a step forward. But I think it has to come down at the end of the day to the one-to-one relationship, and that's what I think has to be core at the the solutions we're trying to develop. Walled gardens have the one-to-one relationship with their users, and they then can segment them as they wish and do the analysis, as they choose to do so. But it all starts with that one-to-one. So if we're looking to try and get the open web to become the trusted web and to bring parity with walled gardens, then we actually, absolutely have to be looking at that from the one-to-one from the very starting point.
Great, thank you. We've had a couple of questions.
If I can just add to that. So,
sure.
I agree with what you both said, and I think it follows the train of thought that I was developing as well, where I think the key focus beyond just the data is today also in who does the analysis, and how is the analysis, how is the segmentation, how is that transparent, and how is that auditable, and how is it customizable. And I think when we look at, and we can see how important that becomes when we also look at the history of regulation. Think about how arcane academic concepts like the right to be forgotten suddenly became law. We now see something similar happening, which is we're seeing regulation move away from the focus on data, which is about maybe data collection, to something that could be, that's some academics call the right to reasonable inference. So looking at the consequences of computation, about what is being calculated. And while this is important from a regulatory point of view, shaping what's calculated, what's created in terms of segments from that individual data, Sarah, that you mentioned, Mathieu, that you mentioned, that is something that is important for the industry as well. And that's why I mentioned earlier that we need this level playing field, not only in data collection and access to data, but also in creating aggregates, creating insights from data that can be used.
Thank you. I was just going to say, there's a couple of comments that have been put in the Q&A section. Paul Dimmock suggests that projects like the Ozone Project can also help in that similar consortia type world where publishers can come together to provide cross-publisher data. So the first-party data and not being able to target individual publishers are being sold for by the industry. Paul Gubbins also mentions here that there's potentially an opportunity. We're seeing with COVID-19 a shift away from content on social platforms towards reputable news publishers. Given that a lot of these publishers may or may not have paywalls, is there an opportunity for them to evolve their strategies and sort of move into a free wall type environment where they can capture first party data, where they can capture new users? Ben, I'd love to understand from you, from a publisher perspective, what do you think, are key actions that the industry needs to talk, and if you can sort of allude to publishers, that'd be great.
Yeah, so yeah, I saw Paul's comment as well. Actually, I think I get what he's saying. I think it's actually quite interesting that a couple of publishers have actually removed their paywalls at this time as well. So if you notice the New York Times, all of their COVID-19 content they've taken away from behind the paywall. So yeah, interesting to note there. But I think what this really does, as as content and data become much more important for publishers, becomes more valuable, I actually think this creates an incentive for publishers to focus more on these and invest more resources into this, into content and into data. And I think specifically on your question about what we need to do as an industry, I think education, first and foremost, of the general public, the people that actually consume our content. It's great that we're all sat around having conversations like this in this industry. We've seen the kind of occasional sort of spike in news, which I think often, as far as we're concerned, kind of I think that really brings home its importance. I think that the sort of implicit value exchange between publishers and their audience, I think that's been there, but it hasn't really been explained as well as it could do by the industry or at all for that matter. And I think actually what's happening at the minute, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and I look to all the premium news outlets, and I think it's incredibly important the work that we're doing, and absolutely that this is it's so important that this continues, and maybe there's an opportunity for publishers to kind of do better at that education piece.
Great, thank you. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, and I'd like Richard to answer this next one if possible. I think there's we talk a lot about ID, and we talked a lot about user targeting. I'd love to understand a little bit more of the impact of these changes across other aspects of our industry, right? So things like measurement and attribution and frequency capping. Richard, I'd love it if you could talk to, what are some of the other evolutions that we've seen in the industry that enable us to continue to deliver value both to brands, publishers, and the ecosystem at large?
Sure, thank you. At Oracle Data Cloud, we're very fortunate to have one of our businesses is the global specialist for measuring advertising modes. We will be able to continue to give measurement analysis to our publishers, to our platforms, and to our advertisers, because all of the measures we use there or do there does not require a cookie. So we're going to be able to show advertisers what content, where their attention is coming from. So it's beyond verification. It's beyond that kind of table stakes ideas about advertising that we've had in the past. It's really bringing to life to a brand or a publisher how exactly people are interacting with them, and what is making their advertising effective, and how they are achieving their return on investment. One of the things that I'm really interested in, I think it's quite interesting this panel has really kind of turned towards content and how important it is that to users to be looking at the right content that's reputable, that's accurate, that's correct. We with Moat are now able to show our advertisers and our brands exactly how people are interacting with their content. So Moat's advertisers in the past have always turned around and said, look, I know that someone that looks at sports editorial is going to, I get a great return on that advertising. They're the type of people that I want to be talking to. We're now actually going to be able to prove to them whether that is correct or wrong. We're also going to be able to prove to them that actually, at the same time, people that are interested in gardens are also interacting with their brand and are delivering value to them. So I think it's that measurement that's going to be the important thing, and finding alternatives to show that they can be effective there and bring that story to life. I think what Ben was saying around the content and showing and giving a better value exchange, you can't do that unless you've got the measurement to show you where that value is coming. If you can see that your consumers are interacting with this part of your website in this sort of way, and at the same time it's giving value to your advertisers because they're also interacting with the adverts, then that's the stuff that we should be doubling down on if we want to keep a free internet. If we're not going to have that, then paywalls are going to come up more and more, because at the end of the day, to deliver that quality editorial, that quality story, it's got to be paid for. But it can't be funded by advertising, it's got to be funded in other ways, basically. So that's the stuff that's really getting us excited at ODC, is how can our measurement really deliver on that for them, using our contextual insights and then bringing that into our measurement suite for solutions.
Thank you, Richard. It's really interesting. I think I absolutely agree with you. I think we at Double Verify are doing something very similar. I think this narrative of evolution is key. You know, if we look at the verification industry, there's so much data. It's not just the verification; it's all technology. I mean, in most cases, there's so much more data around consumer engagement, consumer exposure to ads than we ever give any credence to. And so the exposure and the ability for us to change that narrative, to evolve from measuring to driving performance, is so key as an industry. You know, Ben, would love your opinion on the same question: impact on measurement and attribution, and also evolution of technology.
Yeah, so again, I think this creates a real incentive for publishers to invest in technology, whether it's their own. You know, I dare say we're going to see from bigger publishers, you know, creating a lot of their own technology now, and again, that creates a point of difference in the marketplace for them. I think measurement, crucially, I think again, what we effectively lose with the deprecation of the third-party cookie is the ability to measure this across like massive swaths of the internet. You know, those days of you know, these big campaigns that target thousands of publishers. You know, we're not going to go to those kind of campaigns in a way that we did in the past. So I think that brings measurement back more to individual publishers. And I think there's an advantage there for larger publishers that have got multiple sites. You know, we run, you know, across Warner Media, we have multiple websites, and it's all first party data, so we can measure and we can attribute across all of those websites still with the use of a first party cookie. So again, I think this kind of shifts how premium publishers should approach this, and really puts them in the driving seat for these kind of measurement driven campaigns. Just on that as well, I think by its nature, if brands, advertisers, marketeers can't as effectively do these heavily measurement driven campaigns, I think maybe we're going to see a shift towards more one-to-one type campaigns where brands are working directly with publishers. Perhaps more kind of upper funnel campaigns are going to be we're going to see a lot of growth with them within publishers as well.
Great, thank you. And I suppose the last question from me, and once again, I want to combine a couple of the questions. You know, with any significant change to any ecosystem, the impact across all the constituents of that ecosystem is profound. I suppose the question is, you know, which players or which of those constituents across our ecosystem are well placed to benefit from this, and who requires a rethink? And then secondly, I mean, I'd also appreciate a comment around what's the impact on consumers with the removal of third-party cookies, and will that have any influence on what solutions as an industry we find to replace them? Daniel, I'd love your opinion on this first.
I mean, everyone is very busy rethinking right now, but I think the risk is, you know, that we're seeing the kind of the gulf between the data haves and the data have-nots widening much more quickly, where those that combine very deep granular first-party data in a very scaled manner, plus the ability to analyze that data, i.e. the platforms, move out of this even stronger. That is a risk. And it's a risk ultimately also, not just for other participants, but that could also be a risk for refinancing news, media pluralism, and so forth, which is why it's so important that we have an engagement across the industry about not just who controls the data, but who analyzes it. I see a huge potential for publishers in local markets, more so than in the US, because if you think of markets like Germany and France, they're much more supply side driven than the US, for instance. A huge potential for strong publisher alliances to come out of this stronger, but they need to do things differently than in the past. If we look at the history of alliances and cooperatives, many have failed because of ill-conceived governance structures, because everyone wanted to extract profit from it and not give something into it. So these things need to change from a governance perspective, from an investment perspective, from the publisher side. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, to make this successful, one needs not more of the same data, so more of the same narrow vertical data from the publishers, but the data needs to be enriched by larger collaboration, for instance, from advertisers or other sectors in the industry. If that happens, I'm quite optimistic about the role of the publishers, but if it doesn't happen, I see a stronger shift to the platforms.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, so those that are going to benefit, I think, are those from our point of view, like we're seeing publishers who are kind of forward-thinking, who are defining their first-party data strategies now. We feel that they're going to be the ones that will benefit probably initially from this. We've, have seen examples of them testing different strategies, which is a great thing. Like there is no sort of holy grail and one solution, and that applies to many aspects of the ecosystem. So testing different solutions on the publisher side, how to collect that first party data, how to understand what that value exchange is, how to change the mindset. Any publisher that's thinking about that now, I think, will benefit in the longer term. And then on the other side, you've got the buy side as well, which again needs to look at rethinking perhaps the measurement, as we've said. If we can continue this education piece across the different players, we can actually have much more collaboration, then as together we will benefit more. So it's really a question that, I would say the forward-thinking publishers and the forward-thinking players that are actually testing, trialing stuff right now, seeing how it works, understanding the value exchange with users, and building that trust will be those that will benefit most initially.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Matthew?
Yeah, fully agreed with the point made by Daniel about the gulf between the platforms and publishers and brands, and the risk that they come out even stronger if we are limiting the ability of the independent players to use data at scale. The real risk is for publishers not to have the means to compete, and for brands not to have a choice of where to invest their money, right? That's really what we're looking at, which in turn presents a risk for publishers to be able to sustain the production of content through an advertising business model. So that's what we're looking forward. There's plenty of opportunities to build a better ecosystem, right? And to use this challenge to build something that works better for publishers, for brands, and for consumers. But we need to lean in. We need involvement, because this is not something that can be decided by one side of the ecosystem. So we see publishers getting together and kind of working on consortium. That's a great initiative. We see ad tech vendors adopting some of the solutions that are available out there. That's a great initiative. We haven't seen much involvement for brands and buy side and agencies yet. So we need their involvement and their participation as well, because this is something that has to be redesigned at industry level. In the end, it's an ad tech evolution. Ad tech has been the conduit for that transaction to happen, and we need ad tech to redesign the way we identify users, and that takes everybody's involvement. So that's a great challenge, but that's also a great opportunity if we can redefine this in the next few months.
Great, thank you. I think Marie-Claire is virtually banging on the door for us to finish up. So thank you very much to all the panelists. I think it was a great discussion. As with all of these type of things, there's never enough time. There's a whole bunch of questions, and I mean, I think across the panelists will review the questions and respond accordingly. just to summarize, I suppose, I think as an industry, we've seen the writing on the wall for some time. I think we're now, given the timelines involved, being pushed to accelerate our evolution. And I think it's interesting as an industry, there is still so much we need to do in terms of education, in terms of collaboration, that even after 20 years in this industry, those key foundational components haven't changed. The evolution that we're seeing, the sort of the key developments we're seeing from a lot of players in the industry should do, if nothing else, provide everybody with an opportunity to look at what they've done, look at how they've done things, understand what other tools and technologies are available in this new ecosystem. And one of my favorite quote, simply because I made it up, is challenge the status quo, right? It's no longer enough to continue to do the things that you've always done. There are so many new technologies, there's so many different changes in the ecosystem happening that having introspection, looking at the way you do things, looking at the technologies that you use, and ensuring that you're optimized based on the best technologies, the best data, the best opportunities, the best relationships, and ultimately the best experience for the consumer. So thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you to the IAB for having us on here. And I'll pass back to David Goddard, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Tanzil, and thank you all for an incredible panel discussion and for sharing your insight into a complex challenge that we all need to be mindful of. So in that panel, we ran a couple of polls, and I'm just going to announce the results of those. So the first poll that all of you kindly contributed to was, what does the depletion of the third-party cookie actually mean for the programmatic buying and selling? The answers, or the options you had to choose, was large decrease in programmatic trading, some increase in programmatic trading, no change, some increase in programmatic trading, a large increase. So that was decrease to increase, obviously. The results are large decrease in programmatic trading was 13%, some decrease in programmatic was 56%, no change was 18%, some increase was 9%, and a positive 4% for large increase as well. So thank you for that. And the second poll was next poll results, which was, do you think consumers will benefit from the depletion of the third-party cookie? Yes, 33%, no, 20%, and not sure if they'll notice, 47%. So they were two cracking polls. Thank you all for participating. Look out for more of those. Now, if you're keen to learn more about this topic and that was just discussed, please do look out for IAB Europe's post-cookie guide, which will be providing more detail on the challenge and solutions in development. So this will be published hopefully next week. I also want to highlight IAB Tech Lab Project REARC, as it is an initiative that we all can consider getting involved in. Project REARC is a global call to action for stakeholders across the digital supply chain to rethink and re-architect digital marketing to support core industry use cases while balancing consumer privacy and personalization. So the IAB Tech Lab is orchestrating a collaborative process to educate member and non-member stakeholders to facilitate global input into the development of a new technical standards and guidelines driving privacy by default, addressable advertising and measurement. So we will share more on Project REARC, details on Project REARC in the Virtual Programmatic Day follow-up that you'll all be receiving as well. Now on to our next session. So transparency, or lack of, has been flagged as a barrier to investment to the programmatic ecosystem for a number of years. Many stakeholders, technologies, and organizations have made changes to increase transparency. The next panel is going to debate, have we done enough to deliver transparency in the programmatic chain? Or sorry, have we done enough to deliver transparency in the programmatic supply chain? So I'm delighted to introduce the moderator for this next session, Clem Piazza, is a programmatic director for EMEA at Integral Ad Science. Again, don't forget to submit your questions for the panel using the Q&A box Over to you, Clem.
Thanks a lot, David. I hope you can all hear me, although my earphones are not as cool as yours, but yeah, I'll try my best. So good morning, everyone. This is Clementina, or just Clem, as David mentioned. I'm Programmatic Director for EMEA at Integral Ad Science. I also have the pleasure of wearing another hat today as the newly elected chair of IAB Europe Brand Advertising Committee. So thanks again for joining us this morning. And one small note, fear not, if you've got kids entering the room, they are the most welcome, as it's never too early to start thinking about digital marketing. As Daniel Knapp said, new skills are badly needed. So without further ado, the topic of transparency in programmatic is a vast and at times really challenging one, but we are definitely feeling up for the challenge today with such a lineup of speakers. So without further ado, Gavin, Ross, Steve, Emily, and Andrew, it would be great if we could kick off with some introductions from yourselves.
Hi there, my name's Gavin Stirrett. I'm a VP of Partner Services at OpenX here in Europe. We are a global programmatic exchange providing scaled access to premium publishers.
Hi, my name's Emily Roberts and I look after programmatic revenue in Europe, Middle East and Africa for BBC Global News.
Ross?
Okay, while we wait for Ross, I'm Steve Wing. I'm the Managing Director or Country Manager for the UK and Nordics at Rubicon Project. It means that I've been here about 5 years, based in London. We are a global programmatic exchange. I'm there to lead the right teams doing the right things across our publisher partners, our agencies and our buying partners.
Go on, Ross, I'll let you have your slot back.
Yeah, we can.
Yep, am I okay?
Yep.
I'm Ross Webster. I'm the Managing Director of Foursquare, and Foursquare is an independent location data platform for understanding how people are moving in the real world.
Brilliant.
And hi, I'm Andrew Buckman. I'm CEO of Sublime, and Sublime is a global high-impact ad tech specialist. We create and deliver brand ad experiences at scale.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. So I'd like to kick off with the consideration that, transparency is not really, a new theme per se. There's been a lot of talking about transparency around many different angles. So my question basically is, if we're still talking about transparency, are we really confident as an industry that we've identified the key issues? And if not, what else needs to be done? So I don't know if Gavin, perhaps you want to start tackling this?
Sure. So, I think over the years, the definition of transparency has changed quite a lot. I think if you go back to the early years where ad networks were a very large part of a lot of buys, a lot of the time transparency referred to the placement of ads on sites, what sites they appeared on, and whether that was visible to the person making the buy. Over time, as the marketplace has become more complex, as programmatic has become a major technique used by marketers to buy media, the focus has kind of shifted more towards the mechanics that's going on in the background, and whether those mechanics are fair and transparent and understood by the buyer and indeed by the seller. There has also been a greater focus on the transparency of financial agreements. Historically, financial agreements were not always completely transparent. In fact, a lot of the time they were not at all transparent. And we are increasingly moving to a world where it's important, particularly for larger buyers, for them to understand exactly how hard their dollar is working for them. So I feel like we have kind of got to a point where we know what the major issues are that need to be addressed. And we also have a number of initiatives that are running to address those issues. The trade bodies are working very hard, from ISBA, IAB, AOP. There's numerous initiatives going on. There's numerous companies out there that can work on and provide transparency to what's going on in the programmatic ecosystem. So I think we're in a better place in terms of understanding what the issues are, but clearly there's more work to be done to gain the complete confidence of the marketers at the top of the chain, who will still make somewhat concerning remarks about how transparent they feel the industry is.
Cool. And Steve, would you like to add something around that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna probably unhelpfully agree with Gavin, but I normally do. I think the fact we're on a panel talking about transparency shows you that despite a lot of fantastic work, there's still work to be done. And I think it's as well to reflect upon the fact, as you mentioned in your intro, this is a huge area, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And there's everything from supply chain transparency, so how do we follow the money through the marketplace, all the way through to transparency of auction dynamics, industry standards, fraud mitigation, brand safety, even onto the right of open source code bases and movements like pre-bid, which are designed now to create open, collaborative, inspectable standards with transparency baked in at the start. So it's a really big area. I think we've been good in defining those areas. And I think it's also, to Gavin's point, we should reflect just briefly on a lot of the work that has gone done, because it's easy to forget how many years people have been working really hard to address this issue, because we all believe that transparency grows the market and is an absolute necessity. So everything from the IAB FAQs that were launched in 2019, we're going to talk a little bit later, I think, about the IAB Europe's supply transparency report, ads.txt, apps.ads.txt, supply chain optic through to sellers.json, through to IAB Gold Standard with JIT Webs, the industry initiatives that Gavin's referred to. This has been a ton of best practice going on. We have our agency partners who are as interested in our requirements and our sort of best practice around transparency as they are around our capabilities, our tools, and our supply. So yeah, there's a ton of good stuff that's gone on. Obviously, there's lots to do, but I think we're all aligned on that. So Gavin and I might compete for share of mind and share of revenue with our customers, but we understand that transparency is a core component of growing overall confidence in this marketplace with current participants and future participants. So I think we'd give ourselves probably a B+, A- for effort, maybe an A for effort. We definitely are not there yet. There's still work to be done, but we shouldn't underestimate just how many initiatives are taking place and how committed a lot of people are to solving this problem.
Fantastic. And since you've mentioned Gavin again, not to, keep picking on you or your brain, Gavin, I would like to hear your thoughts on, so Steve mentioned there's a lot that's been done. So, with the aim of giving, as many pragmatic information as possible to our listeners, I would like to hear from you which industry initiatives you think have made the most difference. You can tackle it from, your own personal view, you can tackle it from, your company's perspective, but I'm curious to hear your take on that.
Yep. So I think there's probably a combination of a couple of things that when combined provide a very high degree of transparency and it holds everyone in the chain to a very high standard. The first, which is not, it's not widely used on the buy side, is the supply chain object. It is very important to understand the chain of relationships that sit between the buyer and the ultimate end seller. When you introduce resellers, and more so multiple resellers into the chain, we all know that money starts to disappear off the table that's not necessarily visible at the DSP level, which is the buy side's interface into the ecosystem. So the supply chain object is a very helpful tool to help to start to shine a light onto the path that an ad takes on to get in front of the consumer. I think on top of that, it's not necessarily an industry standard, but it's becoming increasingly common to see agreements being made between companies to provide a greater degree of transparency than maybe comes through any industry initiative. I don't know if we'll get to a stage where any industry initiatives mandate complete financial transparency, but certainly I think where credible and skilled buyers have got good relationships both on the DSP side and on the exchange side, we're starting to see a lot more of buyers kind of saying, look, if you want to see my dollar, then you're going to have to provide more comfort that everything's happening as we understand it. And so that combination of financial transparency as well as supply chain transparency is probably the greatest set of tools that a buyer can have to make sure they understand what's going on.
Fantastic. And, you know, from what you just, you know, the way you just responded, and in general, I mean, when I personally see the issue of, or issues around transparency being raised, I always get an impression that the issue or issues around transparency seem to be very much a thing of the buy side. And you see headlines and issues around brand safety, fraud, lack of transparency, how they're impacting consumer trust, and as you said, you know, brand investment. So what is, you know, and at the same time, we just mentioned all the things that are currently being done to improve things. So I would like to kind of extend and maybe, you know, Ross, pick your brain on, you know, is it only a buy side issue, right? The issue around transparency, and what is, again, like a comment from you on what is making a real difference in moving concerns, you know, further, or, you know, solving the concerns that we've had on the table for a while now.
Yeah, so from our point of view, yes, I mean, you know, there have been big strides, just to build on Gavin and Steve's point. And it seems that there has been a general desire across the whole ecosystem to clean it up. From the buy side and the sell side, there seems to be a drive for greater transparency. And I guess, you know, peer-driven initiatives like TCF, the IAB's TCF program, is an indication of that. And you would hope that the main priority should be down the line. We should be thinking about the users and the consumers as actually the people that should feel secure that we are being doing the right thing around their privacy and what we're doing with their data. But my big worry is the fact that even though you know, a lot of companies are, you know, are following this, that there's some well-founded proof. There's also some that are not, and there seems to be, whether it be through commercial pressures or whether it be through a misreading of the required standards, that a lot of companies are probably abusing the system, manipulating, obscuring it, whether that be, you know, stuff like you see examples of people hard coding consent strings, that there are workarounds. And I think probably the most important thing is actually to see that the regulations are being policed properly. So whether it be the ICO, who are obviously tackling this, or whether through CNIL in France, and ultimately probably organizations like the IAB that could actually police it, to investigate and sort of obviously deal with the bad actors in the market.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, in moving on to a couple of other themes that I would like to explore with you today, there's a question that came up around, you know, what is exactly that we mean by transparency? I think, you know, again, as I kind of caveated at the beginning, this is such a vast topic, but the concept of transparency, the definition of transparency in general, right, is about having a common playing field where, you know, everyone as much as possible and in their different capacity have, you know, all the information or equal access to information that they need to, you know, pursue and complete the action that they need to complete, you know, whatever the function is that they cover in the ecosystem. And I think for this reason, you know, some of the initiatives that have been made around, you know, actually advising the different parties of the ecosystem in what are the correct, or, you know, where to start from in terms of like asking questions, right? What should be their priorities? Like what is the, you know, the access that they need to have in order to fulfill their function to their highest potential? And, you know, one of the resources around that I find extremely useful, and I think readers find it too, otherwise we wouldn't have got to the third edition, is the IAB Europe Supply Chain Transparency Guide. And around that, I would like to pick Andrew's brain for a second. And just, Andrew, if you can like summarize a little bit for everyone listening, what is the IAB Europe Supply Chain Transparency Guide, and who was it developed by and for, and just, you know, why is it such a useful piece of documentation? I think you're on mute.
I am on mute. Yes, sorry.
There you go.
Obviously don't spend enough time on video conferences at the moment. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, it is, as you're saying, it is a really important document, and Steve and I have been discussing this. I think that Steve's going to add a few points in a second, but it's a document really, and it's actually more than just a document. It's really a guide to the kind of questions that you need to ask to be sure about transparency. And it's really to be able to identify actually what transparency means to you as well. So, and it's important because there's more than a third of buyers who think that transparency is a barrier to investment today. And then when you talk about ad tech vendors, that rises up to over half of them. And it's important that we can actually get questions that help each stakeholder category in the whole of the programmatic supply chain, from the buyer through to the seller, to actually make sure there's consistent transparency. So if we're all asking the same questions and asking the same questions in the same way, then we'll always be able to get the right kind of answers. It was first launched in a couple of years ago in 2018, and is updated every 6 to 8 months by the IAB Europe Programmatic Trading Committee. And I'm not sure, Steve, if you've got any other kind of points that you wanted to add onto this.
I just think it comes back to the original premise, Phil. We're having a panel to discuss transparency and what are the ways in which we can help people have a level of comfort and understanding that what they want to do, how they want to transact, how they want to make stuff available, they completely understand. You know, and Gavin mentioned being held to a higher bar of account from, let's say, our agency partners. I think it's completely correct. What this does is it's a really, really good guide that allows people a shortcut to best practice. So if you are an agency or a DSP or you're a publisher and you want to work with certain people, what are the questions you should be asking? What are the questions that any responsible player in this ecosystem should want to answer? And they're tough questions, and they're rightfully so. So it's a really handy guide. I'd argue that the color coordination on it is not great, but that's just a thing. But in terms of its availability, it's just another example of all the stuff we mentioned at the start, which is lots of people are working really hard to try and make people understand where they can go to get the answers to the questions they need. It shouldn't be this hard, but it's a fantastic guide. As like I say, it's a shortcut to best practice. It allows everybody in this marketplace to hold everyone to the highest best practice and standard of account, which is only proper, really.
Fantastic. And I've seen, again, a question popping up around sharing the link to the guide. We will definitely circulate the link to the guide. And if you go onto IAB Europe's website, in the resources section, you can find it as one of the most recent piece of documentation created. So we said, I think, you know, transparency is a wide topic. Transparency means, you know, something different for each single party in the ecosystem. And, you know, we've pointed out, you know, a couple of examples of what that could mean, you know, differently from which kind of position you occupy in the ecosystem. We've mentioned the guide as, you know, a great starting point to have a repository of questions that in your function you should be asking to get all the information ultimately that probably allow you to complete, you know, your task, your job. So moving a little bit along, we wouldn't, I think it would be a bit blind not to, you know, mention the times that we are currently living. So in such a critical and quite dramatic time of history, I think we're gonna just start a poll here to stop and think for a second and get your opinion as listeners, whether the current situation we are in has kind of changed the perspective around, you know, this kind of topic. So is transparency as, you know, important right now, or there's other things that we should be thinking about? So how's this current situation with COVID-19 changed the priority of such, you know, a topic that has been so prominent in recent time before, you know, the situation that we're in? And I guess at this time, a poll should magically appear on screen. Yes, there you go. That was swift. So we'll give you a couple of minutes and then if I remember my instructions correctly, I shall be able to read out the response. I still see it on screen. So I guess we're still going.
We can't vote. What kind of democracy is this?
Exactly. Thinking about transparency. No, I'm joking. All right. So poll results. Actually, so we've got as response that 39% think that is more of a priority. 53% think that transparency is as much of a priority as it was before the current situation kind of kicked in, and 8% think that is less of a priority. So I think this gives me a great cue to actually, again, pick your brains on, around this topic. So how does COVID-19 impact the transparency discussion? And is it, what do you think, since we weren't allowed to vote, right? What do you think? Is it more or less important? And maybe, Steve, do you want to take this one?
I mean, yeah, I feel like, yeah, I mean, from my point of view, obviously, we are living through unprecedented times. So our immediate priorities have shifted. And, making sure that ourselves, the people we work with, our loved ones are safe, is probably top of the pile. When we discussed this originally, I was firmly in the camp. So I'm glad the vote has gone my way. Not that that's important, that this is as if not more important. So yes, I say immediate priorities might make some of it hard to get to the top of the list, but trust in this marketplace and the impact we've talked about on subsequent investment in the future, that's not going to change. And if anything, the scrutiny of marketeers and brands and publishers to ensure they can get through this period, I think makes transparency even more important. So certainly from my perspective, the conversations I'm having around this are not easing up. People really want to understand better certain areas, they want to sign agreements, they want to do things. So I think that's fantastic, but I'll let other people chime in.
Sure. Anyone, Gavin, Ross, Emily, Andrew, do you want to add to this? What's your thoughts?
So I was definitely in the losing camp. I guess chiming off what Steve just said, I do think priorities have shifted slightly. I don't think transparency is any less important. I still think people care deeply about transparency, both from the demand side and from the supply side. But I do think that COVID clearly creates just a maze of challenges, some of which are completely to be expected, and some of which probably catch us all by surprise. And I think just the nature of kind of dealing with all of these fires or issues or just things, as well as the fact that I think we all probably are slightly more caring people than we've ever been before. Priorities have shifted a little bit. And I do think transparency has slipped down the agenda a little bit. I don't think it's any less important, though.
Cool. Ross, do you want to add anything on this?
I guess I would agree that it shouldn't be any less important in the current sort of days we live in. I guess from our point of view, our conversations have very much slipped into privacy issues. Being a location company, we've obviously started to work a lot with governmental and NGOs around how to understand people's movements in the current sort of, in lockdown. So I guess sort of for us, it's thrown up sort of questions about sort of privacy and what we can share and what we can't share. And I would say that we haven't changed our philosophy on the importance of making sure that the user's privacy is absolute. I guess sort of going forward, obviously we'll be working with brands a lot more to help them understand what the new normal looks like. But I don't think it's going to change our, it hasn't changed our philosophy around transparency and the privacy issues at all.
Thank you. And sticking to the topic, infamous topic, obviously, of coronavirus. So coronavirus is becoming an increasingly blacklisted term. So I would like to pick Emily's brain on, so do you think is necessary to, have this kind of approach towards blocking coronavirus as a term, and how do we ensure that we continue to fund quality journalism? I know this is a topic quite dear, obviously, to your heart. So yeah, I would really like to hear your take on this.
I think so. Blocking coronavirus, there's two things. There's two main elements. From kind of BBC's perspective, although a lot of the news around coronavirus has been negative, we've had some incredible stories, and I think everybody in our daily lives would agree that the kind of amazing kind of community spirit that's come out has just been incredible. And it's things like Captain Tom, who's just about to reach £30 million today. And we've done an amazing article about all the incredible street art that's popping up for the NHS, the 8 PM clap on a Thursday, like all incredibly inspiring news stories are sadly being blocked because people are just blocking coronavirus. So that's the first point. But I think the second point is we've found, and what's really frustrating for us, is that not only people are blocking coronavirus, they're blocking the whole of news. And so that has a severe impact when your name is BBC Global News. And so that's really frustrating, because a lot of other publishers out there will not only do news, but they'll do a lot of feature sites as well. So for instance, we have a lot of amazing feature sites like our business site or culture site, travel, which or sports, which again has been affected, but they don't focus on coronavirus at all, and yet actually the whole of our site is being blocked, and it's super frustrating, because some of the articles that are coming out of those feature sites, our feature sites are actually up by 30% in terms of the volume of people coming to them, because people are obviously going to the news and then they're going onwards. But it is a challenge. We've basically broken every record in the book, which is incredible. BBC is kind of, I think most people would agree, especially in the UK, it's the place that people have come, whether it's on the TV or whether it's online, to understand what is going on. And we've been classed as kind of the fifth emergency service right around the world. And it's a massive challenge when we've had record-breaking weeks, bigger than like any other time since the BBC went online, which is insane. And yet, because advertisers are blocking our content, it means the revenue isn't kind of mirroring that. And so I guess that's super frustrating. I think it's also, so on to your second point about kind of funding quality journalism, and I know Matthew spoke about it on the previous call, but I think there's a really, really important, and this comes back to transparency as well, and I don't think anyone's mentioned it, where actually we should be talking about the consumer. The consumer is the most important thing, and like being part of the BBC, we put our, because obviously, I mean, that's the purpose of BBC News, is to basically ensure that everyone gets unbiased and impartial news, and that's so, so important. And so for us, I think there is we have to ensure that we are basically making sure that our people understand our advertising and kind of how we're making that revenue. And it was only until kind of GDPR and e-privacy came out that people actually started to realize, oh wait, publishers are actually taking our data, there's actually a kind of almost like a currency for this, and started to kind of make people realize and question where they wanted to accept cookies or not. And obviously that's going to go further and further when we have like opt-out over the next few months or years. But I think that's super important, that our readers understand why it's so important that we have advertising, and to kind of make sure that they understand what that's for. And also I like that's going to be a new currency in a way. So I think when we talk about transparency, it's always going to be consumer first. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Emily. And Andrew, do you want to add anything around this?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I just definitely want to echo what Emily's saying, is just the general frustration by all sort of news providers and quality journalists, because it's, I mean, this is really the time where their work is actually being more appreciated than general. I mean, where people actually do have time to read in-depth articles and opinion pieces about what's going on, which helps them form their opinions and helps them fully understand what the big picture is, rather than just going through life, as I'm sure we always do, just getting sound bites and getting sort of just quick one paragraph condensed aspects of the news. Here we in the general public have got real time to actually dig deep into the news, and there's so much quality journalism out there, and we see with all of the publishers that we work with that their whole sites are just blanket banned and blocked by advertisers, despite, as Emily was saying, there being travel content or sport content or fashion or anything else. And up until about March, or last month, in March was only last month, feels like last year, Trump, I think, was the most popular blacklist keyword. And then coronavirus took it over now, and there's more than 3,100 advertisers who are blocking it. And I think, Clem, you might be familiar with that, because I read that on an Integral Ad Science press release, I think. But there was another study that was done by GumGum, and they've looked at nearly 3 million web pages, and they've seen that over 60% of those web pages have actually, which have got COVID-19 related keywords, are classified as safe. So there's no real reason to just blanket ban coronavirus. And we both as actors in this, and also as an association, we can help by lobbying the government to help, and that does have some effect. I mean, Oliver Dowden, who's our culture secretary, he stepped in and has spoken to advertisers and brands and says there's a need for pragmatism and to do everything that's possible to prevent this decline in news publishing, which is really starting to relive. I know that the IAB, but also Newsworks and the AOP and the IPA have all issued guidance to advertisers and agencies. And we're seeing also some agencies now that are actually taking a stand in this. I've seen that Group M and Universal McCann have advised their clients against blacklisting all coronavirus articles. Because there's so many stories about the positive side and the positive aspect. Of course, brands don't want to be next to stories that are outlining the death tolls in different markets, but you don't want to block the kind of content which actually brings on positive sentiment.
Fantastic. And, one thing, first of all, you guys would be happy to hear or read that we're actually getting quite a lot of questions that I'm afraid we're not going to have time to answer all of them live, but we'll commit to definitely, provide an answer to as part of the follow-ups. So picking up, I think, Em, you got a supporter in the audience, or many, one that came forward and said that, you're 100% right, that it's not necessary to use, keyword exclusion. And I can only vouch for that. I think, I hope, if there's one thing that you take away from today's sessions overall, is that you have, a team, organizations of experts that are there, ready to support any sort of question or doubt that you might have around the ecosystem with documentations and personally. And there's a lot of companies out there. Obviously, I represent, part of the verification side of things. Like, we're all available, no matter, who you use as a provider, to provide you with guidance of how best, to, make sure that you're not delivering your ads against, content that you might not feel confident, to deliver against, but, that you don't cut off the opportunity to deliver your ads, in very, very meaningful, content, expanding your reach, and most importantly, still funding quality journalism. Because as I said, as I always say, I think, we definitely don't want to be in a place where such important resources get taken away from us because they're not properly funded. So picking a couple of questions from the very extensive list. So I'd like to use, to pick a bit of a controversial one. If I find it again, yes, I do. Okay, so do you feel, and this is open to any one of you obviously that wants to take the answer, do you feel that agencies have a lot to answer for in regards to lack of financial transparency and are using ad tech as an excuse. I feel that we kind of all represent ad tech, or a big part of us represent ad tech in this group. So I'm quite curious to hear what your take is. I think like Gavin has unmuted himself. I don't know if you want to take this one.
Happy to take a first stab at it. But I think every single person in the supply chain or every single group of companies has at some point done something which has just built on mistrust. Every single part of the value chain feels pressure, has felt pressure, continues to feel pressure as market shares kind of change. And that sometimes pushes different groups into doing things which are not necessarily completely transparent. So I think there have been examples over the years which have been very well publicized where there has been a lack of transparency. I think we're kind of moving past that world. I think from advertisers through agencies into DSPs, exchanges and publishers, I think every single group of companies understands the areas of transparency that affects them and their direct partners. And so we're in a smarter world where people can put paperwork in place to try and address that. I think the entire value chain has a role to play in terms of taking blame for where we are today.
Fair. Is there any further comment on this one? Otherwise, I've probably got to move on. I've got another couple of questions that popped up that I'm really keen to cover, but I'm very happy to hear if there's anyone else. I think like Andrew has unmuted himself as well. Do you want to add anything around this, Andrew?
No, I just didn't mute myself after the last one.
There you go. You're on the spot now.
I do agree. I do actually agree with Gavin in this respect. So we do all have our part to play in this, and I'm sure. I mean, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and there's this whole ecosystem has evolved and has gone just in trying to run to catch up with technology. Some people take advantage of that. Some people try and sort of run ahead of the curve and find new ways of doing business. I think that we've now all reached a state of consciousness where we realise that we can't just instantly try and take advantage of niches. We need to work together to make sure that everything is treated fairly.
I would add though that I don't think, as Gavin said, like I don't think the whole market has mistrusted. I think the main issue with programmatic is the fact that we've made it so much more complicated than it needs to be, and that's why we end up with loopholes. I don't think people on purpose, well, the majority of people on purpose go around the market trying to mistrust each other. From our perspective, no, I think agencies do an incredibly good job to navigate the market in such a kind of complicated market, and we are seeing now like changes being made that are going to help kind of make it easier to navigate, but I think it's just the fact that it's such a complicated market.
Thank you, Emily. And I actually, the other question I wanted to pick was directed to either, you and Ross specifically. So I'm going to pick Ross's brain next. So the question was, Ross, Emily, from your global perspective, is there a difference in market drive for transparency region by region, since we are in a IAB Europe forum? So Ross, would you be able to comment on this if you've seen anything varying drastically, like from market to market, or any comment around market difference?
No, not really. I think sort of to all the points that are being made today, really, that I think sort of transparency sort of goes beyond the individual market nuances. I think sort of, I think every market understands that there is that need. I guess individual markets are react to it differently, whether it be through the regulatory bodies, but no, maybe it's because I'm coming across a lot of I'm dealing mainly with global companies that seem to be taking a global approach in the way that they behave. So I haven't seen any individual nuances. I mean, Emily might well have.
Yeah, I would disagree. I think, so I can only speak from EMEA because that's the region I look after, but I think it varies very differently from region to region. For instance, in the Middle East, the whole transparency is completely different to what you see in kind of Western Europe, and it's the same in Africa as well. In Dubai, they've got a very strange way of doing things in the advertising industry, which may not potentially be the most transparent. I think in Western Europe, we're the most focused about transparency compared to a lot of the other regions. And then in Africa, like especially with South Africa, it's still reasonably quite new, and there's some things that they're jumping ahead of the curve that we obviously went through that they're having to completely avoid now, which is quite nice for them. But yeah, it massively depends. I mean, I could go into further regions, but yeah, I think it massively depends what region you're talking about.
And I'm conscious that, again, we are ourselves a bit over time, but I wanted to cover what was actually one of the first questions that came through in the Q&A. And please, 2 minutes left. See, I've got digital, amazing. So, yeah, be trustful of the fact that we're going to be following up to all questions. So if you've been left out in the live discussion, we're going to cover it. Don't worry. So the last point that I wanted to pick your brains on is that, I'm going to merge two questions here. So it's interesting that there is no DSP on the panel, considering the Trade Desk recent announcement. So the Trade Desk recent announcement, I believe it refers to, and that's the reason why I want to pick, some of your brains in particular here. So the Trade Desk recent announcement is about asking SSPs for a single supply path to publisher inventory. So we did try to get a DSP, on the panel, but this is all voluntary time and whatnot, so we can't always, fulfill what we're planning to do. But yeah, so I would like to pick anyone's brain if you want to come forward around, what's your thoughts around this announcement, especially from an SSP perspective or publisher perspective.
I was just going to say, I think it's a really, really good step in the right direction, and it's really interesting speaking to a lot of ad tech vendors how they are now trying to follow suit. There's always somebody in the market that's brave enough to put a step forward, and I think this is a prime example of a company that's put their kind of feet forward and made a big decision. And a lot of the time things can backfire, but I think this is a great step to kind of transparency and to make it a lot more kind of clearer, the ecosystem. And from a publisher's side, I think especially for us and how our ad stack is laid out, it works incredibly well for us. So yeah, I'd like to see more kind of initiatives like that in the industry.
I think as well, talking to one of the points that you made earlier, Emily, a lot of the perhaps transparency and trust issues that have come up in the past have not necessarily come up deliberately. They've come up because of the complexity of technology. And I think one of the things that Trade Desk are looking at doing is simplifying complexity. Through nobody's fault, we've ended up with a multitude of ways to connect to publisher supply. And that does not always appear completely transparently to DSPs. So they don't necessarily understand transparently what's going on. There may be signals as to what connection the inventory is coming through, but that might not always be visible. And by asking that exchanges pick a single route, I think complexity and efficiency, complexity is removed and efficiency is created, and that creates more transparency in terms of the path from the demand to the supply. And it's a positive thing, to Emily's point. Trade Desk obviously the first to make that choice, and part of, I think, a wider initiative to create a greater degree of transparency in the supply path.
Yeah, and I think it just goes back to the continuum of this conversation, where we started, which is there are lots of things that are going on, and this is a classic example, as Gavin and Emily have both pointed out. There are sometimes anticipated consequences, not because anyone wanted them to be, they just happened. So the quicker we can move forward with those, and everyone's aligned on that, the better. So yeah, I would just agree with Emily and Gavin on that.
Fantastic. And So thank you, everyone. I think, we're getting some sort of virtual, signs of like, shut it, you're over time. So I would like, once again to thank you all, Ross Webster, Steve Wing, Emily Roberts, Andrew Buckman, and Gavin Stirrett for joining me today. And I will pass on the word again to our great host, David Goddard. Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, I was muted. Let's start it again. Classic. Thank you, Clem and panel. Another great discussion, which rich with takeaways. As mentioned on the panel, if you are keen to understand how you could achieve a greater level of transparency for you and your organization, or you could be wondering what questions you should be asking, please seek out the latest iteration of IAB Europe Supply Chain Transparency, republished last month. And again, we'll be sharing a link after the Virtual Programmatic Day with all the participants and all the attendees on that. And like Steve's feedback, we're also keen to get your feedback on the color scheme there as well. Now on to the next panel, which will be exploring the state of supply path optimization and who can benefit from focusing on the path an advert takes to inventory supply. Moderated by Daniel Knapp, IAB Europe's chief economist, in his second appearance. And again, he's probably back, I hope he's back, with an infamous Zoom background, which apparently is being mentioned widely on Twitter. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. David, I think Zoom backgrounds are a fantastic way to spice things up. I got this one here because I got the laundry drying behind me, so it's a matter of necessity. I'm extremely grateful to the previous panel for setting up the discussion so fantastically well for the acronym that we are going to talk about next, SPO, or Supply Path Optimization. We've heard about transparency, and we've heard about the opacity of the ecosystem, and I think Emily from the BBC really put it very well when she said, we've made things more complicated than they should be. And Steve Wing from Rubicon, I think, very rightly said that we've seen an explosion of complexity, not necessarily because we wanted things to be this complex, but because we've created unintended consequences for our action. But I think also that the industry kind of thrives and kind of celebrates, or has celebrated, the complexity inherent in programmatic quite a bit. I mean, if you think about the classic programmatic pilgrimage every year to Mexico, we love to talk in acronyms. We love to thrive in complexity because it shows how important technological solutions are. Yet, we've also seen, and I think any ecosystem, any industry that has grown organically through technology is seeing this. Complexity everywhere, lack of standards, a multitude of vendors that need to talk to each other, etc. When we look at ways of making the programmatic world simpler, such as header bidding, when we look at things like more SSPs facilitating demands for publishers, these were great things, but they also created new complex consequences, like DSPs needed to look at more data. We saw the concept of QPS, queries per second, suddenly become really an economic concern for many parties in the industry. So we've come up with either technological or human-based solutions to really drill more deeply into the programmatic supply path to foster transparency, as in the previous panel, but also to optimize, to change things. And before I introduce my stellar panel, I would just like to share briefly one slide with you to illustrate this complexity. What you can see on this screen here are just a couple of supply paths. Here, having worked with a publisher, we looked at the SSP log level data, and just from an SSP perspective, looked back at who's buying, what paths are these companies choosing. And you can see how complex things are. And this is just a snapshot, a single snapshot. These things evolve over time constantly. So we have to think, are these paths all viable? Should we streamline the industry? Should we learn from the logistics industry and others to figure out what is the best path from demand and supply, and how could that look like? And this is something that we would like to discuss in the panel right now. So Marie-Claire, if you can put up the panel slides to introduce the panelists, I will, wonderful. I'll introduce the stellar team. I'm really thrilled that we got such a kind of diverse set of industry participants here. Lisa from Pubmatic, tech player, Simon from Bloomberg, publisher, Tom from agency, Shane, again, tech, IP and web, and Christoph also from a very different perspective, also tech. So we've got lots of stellar views on what supply path optimization is, how it looks like, how it's going to evolve. And thank you all for joining us. And let's start with a quick introduction of who everyone is, and also with particular emphasis on why are you interested in SPO. Lisa, would you like to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa Kalijny. I run demand for EMEA at Pubmatic, which is an omnichannel SSP. I think SPO is something that has been an acronym in our lives for probably about the past 2 or 3 years. So an exciting time to talk about it and work closer with the agencies and buyers.
Thanks.
My name is Simon Baker, and I head up programmatic for Bloomberg Media in Europe, Middle East and Africa. Just noticed I must have the only person with the shortest hair before coronavirus rather than now in that picture. Why is SPO so important for us? I think it's about transparency, and it's about unblocking the pipes. It's understanding what's going on and who are the players, and more importantly, what commissions and fees are being taken.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom from OMG, head of programmatic development over there, looking at the features and capabilities that we need to develop as a group in programmatic and to fill those strengths quickly. SPO for us is performing a role that I believe agencies have done since the dawn of time, which is trying to get the inventory and the audiences that our advertisers are looking for the most efficient and best possible price. So that might see me buying media from Simon through Lisa's connection, and I just want to optimize that as much as possible.
Thanks, Shane.
Hi everybody, I'm Shane from IAB Web. We are a global leader in smart programmatic infrastructure and media trading technology. We facilitate more than 4,000 trading connections across more than 300 DSPs and SSPs. So we have a unique perspective on many of the supply paths that that buyers are taking today.
And lastly, Christoph.
Hi, my name is Christoph Lies. I work at Yieldbird. Yieldbird is a company that simply allows publishers to make most out of the programmatic ecosystem. My team is responsible for managing the programmatic campaigns and also for selling the inventory to other buyers using deals. And the SPO, from our perspective, is simply a way to make all the transactions that we are involved in as easy and as fast as possible.
Thank you all. And you already started to define SPO, and that's really the first question to the audience. SPO with 3 letters, so many meanings. We've seen concepts like ads.txt, we've seen supply chain object, sellers.json, we've got files, we've got standards. What really is SPO? Do we have a unified definition of that across the industry, or how does it vary? Lisa, what do you think?
I don't know if there's, I think, the unified definition of it, but I think the way that we really simplify and explain it, and I think it's a Digiday actually analogy, is that think of it as a bazaar. So you're in Istanbul, you go to the Grand Bazaar and you're looking at all the textile vendors and you're seeing that a lot of them have all of the same fabrics. Now, as a tourist, you don't know the price. You don't know the cost of things. You don't know who's got the best quality and who's got the closest path to the actual fabric makers. Now, as a local, you would go into that bazaar, you know who everyone is, you go to your go-to person and you pay, you know exactly what you're going to pay for, and you pick up that best fabric. So I think SPO is exactly like that. It's getting that supply from the closest path to the publisher and looking at it from an efficiency perspective. So you, as Tom, is paying the best price.
Anyone else on board with the bizarre metaphor, Tom as an agency? How do you see it?
So first, I would say the analogy of a bazaar is a good one. I think also if you think back to a world before, places like Money Supermarket, where you could perform price comparison and make sure that you didn't have that buyer's remorse after paying for your car insurance and thinking, oh, if only I'd gone through a different provider, I could have got exactly the same cover for a better price. And it's exactly as Lisa describes. It comes down to you know, the relationship with Simon's inventory. Simon has a number of different SSPs that he might work with that you can see displayed in one of the most beautiful and tidy ads.txt files I've ever seen in my life. So I implore you all to head to bloomberg.com/ads.txt and check that out for yourself. But I'm sorry to say that not every ads.txt file is as beautifully displayed as that. We've already kind of talked about the ads.txt initiative a little bit today. What we found as an agency when we created our own crawlers and kind of assessed the information available to us when ads.txt did proliferate across the suppliers we work with was that publishers like Simon were working with up to 28 different SSPs as resellers and 14 different you know, suppliers as direct, which Daniel, your wonderful graph depicts beautifully as well. And armed with that information, we decided that not every single one of those people representing that inventory can be the most efficient path to supply every single time. So we see it as our job as agencies helping advertisers to optimize that path to supply.
Shane, your company does a lot of the kind of plumbing and piping in the background of the industry. So I think you might have a unique perspective to understand, where did this SPO really come from? Why are we talking about it now?
Sure. So I think just to echo Tom's sentiment, we think of SPO today mainly in terms of, you know, checking off some sort of checkboxes and validating the you know, the reality of what you think is your supply path to a publisher audience. I think at a very high level, though, SPO is a catch-all term really for ensuring that as a media buyer, you can sort of realize your business goals in the most efficient way possible to that desired supplier audience. Originally, the need for SPO emerged really to address two main issues that were plaguing the demand side of the RTB ecosystem. The first being a rapid rise in bid duplication, which resulted mainly from the rise of header bidding. And its adoption by publishers, and the second issue then being the sort of the growing issue really of, if you like, unfair or inconsistent auction dynamics within RTB auction, and just the lack of transparency that you had around those. So, you know, these are really practices performed by certain sort of inter-principal platforms in the ecosystem, mainly SSPs or exchanges, on the way to that publisher audience or on the way to sort of receiving that bid request or impression.
If I might just jump in, you mentioned the term transparency. For the sake of our audience, would you guys see SPO as a subset of transparency, like discussed in the second panel, or is it more than just transparency?
So I think SPO is impossible without transparency. So good practice SPO, you need to actually have access to the data points in order to perform SPO, whether that's on a manual basis or on a more sort of machine-led basis using advanced techniques around machine learning and so on. But absolutely, the minimum requirement for good practice SPO is transparency, so that you can actually get access to the data points.
Yes, Simon, we've already heard about your Marie Kondoed TXT, and one acronym often doesn't come alone, but with a second one, and there's something called DPO, Demand Preference Optimization. So that's the cousin of SPO, as some call it, the publisher side of SPO. So if we think about, we've talked to the buy side currently, representatives from the buy side, what does SPO mean, or DPO mean to you as a publisher?
So we're focused on DPO. So just to back it up, because we dearly love a three-letter acronym in this industry. So it's a total reverse of SPO. So we're really looking to understand how impressions are being bought, rather than Tom's probably looking more from how they're being sold. So we're looking at this the other way around. So kind of what does that really mean? So we're looking at a few things from our SSP partners. So some examples would be, we would be looking at win rates. You know, what's the win rate for SSPX over SSPY? We'll be looking at response times. Latency comes into this, fast page loads. That's all part of DPO as well. It's not just the commercial side. Ad quality. Ad quality is a big play here. What does ad quality look like? It looks like a couple of things. It looks at advertisers. It looks at the categories, and it also looks at the messaging, which is obviously very relevant at the moment. And then you kind of start taking a little deeper dig, and then you kind of start getting into some of the granular payment terms. So, you know, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days. And then particularly, unfortunately, kind of in this current climate, which is quite topical, is credit history. You know, are the people we're working with, are the buyers we're working with able to pay their bills at the end of the day? Because none of us want to be left with bad debts. Some great initiatives going on in the marketplace at the moment. I have to call out this one because Lisa's looking at me. PubMatic, for example, have brought forward their payment terms for Q2, which I think is a brilliant initiative around stuff like this, bringing more liquidity into the market. Just if I can flip back for a second, just while I've got the microphone on SPO. So from where we sit on the publisher side, SPO is starting to feel like a new name for unique demand. Okay, that's how it's starting to feel. Every SSP that's coming to us says you have to work for us for this reason. So if we take an example, so Index are quite heavily tied up with Rubicon at the moment. So from a publisher perspective, it's going to be a very brave publisher that won't have a conversation with Index. You know, are you really not going to work with Group M globally? The answer is probably no. So some of these conversations put certain SSPs in very, very strong positions. And then my last comment is SPO, DPO, they're all really, really good initiatives. But what worries me, and maybe I've jumped a few questions, is kind of we're digging tunnels from opposite ends here. And Tom, I hope we're going to meet in the middle here. I'm sure we are, but there is a concern that we're coming at this from different directions.
Well, it's all about you know, quality audiences and quality inventory, which you've got in spades, Simon. So you don't need to worry about that. It's just making sure that everybody in the chain between and as a middleman ourselves, you know, ultimately it's about our advertisers and, you know, you guys, the publisher, and we've heard that reiterated a number of the times today. It's about making sure that chain is as efficient as possible, and that everybody in it is adding value, not just detracting.
If we're just going to sum up on the...
I would also, hold on, Daniel, can I just add something to that? Because I think it's about meeting in the middle, but I'd also say, Simon, I think that it's about partnership and having the opportunity to have that relationship with not just Tom, but also the SSP and the DSP, and making sure that everyone is working together to make sure that not only Tom's needs are met, but also yours as the publisher. Because if everyone has the agreed set of KPIs, then everyone knows exactly what's at stake and how they can work better together.
I think from all the answers so far, and Christoph, I'm really keen to hear your point of view as well in a second. Just to summarize, when we tried to define what SPO is, we saw it from the buy side, from the sales side. We've talked about the paths and the lengths of the path, but then also we talked about contract terms. So it seems to me that they're both technical challenges, but also market economic challenges coming together under this umbrella term of SPO. And Christoph, you help publishers monetize better, and insights are a key component in what you deliver. How are you helping with SPO? What kind of decision support are you providing?
Well, I believe that SPO was in place even long before the term SPO was coined. So the buyers were trying to get the best impressions for the lowest price without the hassle that is generated by some parties that buy inventory in bulk and sell it on the market, claiming that they are doing it on the behalf of the publisher. And the easiest approach that can be done manually that we found so far was just to use private dealers or PMPs. It's a very simple case of the buyer being in touch with, for example, Simon, yeah, and telling Simon that I need to buy a specific amount of impressions, and I'm using this particular DSP, and then Simon creates a deal for me, and in this way I can just go directly from my DSP to his SSP, and then buy the impressions this way, getting additional transparency on top of that, getting additional brand safety because I know the content, I know where my ads are going to be displayed, and so on and so forth. So the best manual solution that we found so far, and we are utilizing it very heavily with our publishers, is those deals that we create for the buyers. The deals are pretty easy to manage. They, of course, don't solve all the issues that are on the market. The deals sometimes don't work, and we have to troubleshoot them. But at the end of the day, we found that the deals are the best manual solution. Well, relying on manual solutions on the market when there is a billion transactions every hour is not the best way to approach it. But it might be the only solution if we need to get rid of almost all the parties that are involved in the process. So this would be my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've established kind of what SPO is, and we've touched on some of the issues that SPO is designed to tackle. But let's do it a bit more systematically. What problems is SPO designed to solve? And we've got a question in the audience which relates to that, which is, can you elaborate a bit on the kind of inconsistent auction dynamics? So is there one problem, like the length of the chain, that we're trying to solve? Is it just intransparency, or what's the whole portfolio of things that SPO can and should address? Lisa, what do you think?
Just looking at this poll, I mean, the easy way is to go all of the above, but just thinking through it, I think that it's not just about the regulators and not just about government pushing us. I think it's the really more demand for transparency. I think over the past probably year and a half, as we've worked closer with the agencies, we hear from them is that, you know, we've spent all this time building relationships with the DSPs, but we haven't really dedicated the time to build the relationships with the SSPs and really understand capabilities and understand the benefits of working closer together. So I think that in that building that relationship with the SSPs, it's them realizing that, you know, I can ask for the tools that are necessary for me to do my job quickly and easily. So I always say is help us help you. Like we're all here to make, you know, the publisher's life easier, but also the buyer side easier. So how do we do this together?
We got a quick poll up. Please feel free to vote exactly on that question. What has driven the demand for SPO? Tom, from an agency perspective, are your clients approaching you to say, we want to do SPO? Is that something you are selling them, or how do you talk about that in your day-to-day job?
No, our clients are not rushing to use another three-letter acronym in relation to programmatic. That won't surprise anybody. No, agencies, advertisers task agencies with you know, getting the best possible media placements for them at the best possible price. You'll hear a lot earlier about identity and kind of the consolidation that's happening there. You know, the consolidation that we heard and the simplifying of complexity that we heard about in the previous panel as well. SPO is, you know, for us, does have a common thread through that, with our advertisers coming to us and saying, can you make the supply chain simpler, more effective and more efficient? One of our major clients, in fact, you know, P&G, Mark Pritchard, probably uttered the most famous call to arms on this when he talks about the murky media supply chain, 2 or 3 years ago now, and really set in place a chain of events that leads up to agencies like ourselves building relationships with SSPs like Lisa's, as she described. So spending much more time with SSPs, and that necessitated some work on our side, because if you open up DSPs today, you can see that there are 350 exchanges and sub-exchanges available to you to buy from. And we can't possibly have relationships with every single one of them to the degree that we would like. So it's really important to have, Simon's endorsement as a publisher for who he feels is worth working with. That's who, has a lot of power here. And it's also important to have people like Lisa doing a lot to work with us, someone to speak to at the end of the phone, for want of a better analogy, to then have that relationship with and develop that capability on our side.
And what you mentioned kind of really fits well with the poll results which just got in. So when we look at what has driven the demand for SPO, one of the main things, 36% of respondents said the demand for transparency. Others, 10% said change in auction dynamics. So that seems to be an issue. And others, even 6%, not many, said pressure from regulators. So it seems to be some kind of anticipatory move by the industry, and seems to be linked to transparency to show how the industry functions. And 47% said all of the above. So many reasons for SPO. And Tom, you mentioned the advertiser wants the best inventory for the cheapest price. So SPO is some kind of optimization. What does that mean? Let's say, Simon, from a publisher perspective. We said all of the parties here in this panel are interested in doing SPO, but are we pulling all on the same string? And if someone, if the buy side is optimizing the best path to the inventory from the buy side, is that also the best path for the publisher, or are SPO and DPO kind of competing in some kind of algorithmic battle for price? So is the kind of yield management 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, this is a personal perspective. I don't like the idea that there's two different ways of doing this. I don't think we're all pulling in the same direction. And Lisa, I wrote down "You're better together." I think that should be our slogan on this. I like that. We should use that. So it's no surprise that any buyer, and it's just easy to pick on Tom because he's there. You want to access our inventory for the cheapest possible price. Breaking news, like, we're fine with that. I know that's what you're trying to do. But, as soon as we bring this magic word transparency and understanding into the equation, and we understand where some of these fees and kind of like these reselling of inventory is going, guess what? It means we end up with more inventory. It means that we get a slightly higher eCPM. It means that you can probably bid at lower prices. I don't have a massive problem with that. It's the lack of understanding and a lack of clarity that's currently in the marketplace, especially from where we sit, is that we don't understand everything that's going on.
And that brings us really to the point, who should be doing SPO? We see on the one hand, we can't really understand what's going on because there's so much complexity. We mentioned the hundreds of different vendors involved, which just, cognitively can't be processed by any human being as saying what's better, what's worse. So it needs some kind of technology. At the same time, we stressed also how important relationships are, the ability to pick up the phone and to get transparency and accountability that way. We've talked about in the beginning of a QPS, a very technical thing again. So when we see who does SPO, is that a technological fix? Does that mean a human analyst trawls through an ad.txt, so that's JSON? Or does it mean more informed conversations between partners during quarterly business reviews and so forth?
I mean, I would say, I think that we're better together, Simon. I'm into it. Let's definitely use that. But I think that the IAB put together the supply chain transparency guide, and I think that's the perfect starting point. So I don't think it's just about the SSP doing SPO or the publisher. I think it's about everyone understanding and having that level of education. So I often go back to using education as an important piece of the programmatic puzzle, because what you don't know, you don't understand, and what you don't understand, you think is murky. And I think that if you're able to give that level of transparency, both to the agency, the brand, and the publisher, it makes everyone's life easier. So it's not necessarily a race to the bottom, it's understanding how much is actually getting to Simon. So it's about not only paying the lowest price, as Tom cares about, but also understanding that we're all businesses, we're all in it to, make sure that we're profitable, but also provide a service, and making sure that that service not only helps the publishers that we're working with, but also the advertisers as well, and that we create a healthier and more holistic ecosystem.
Yeah, I think before I get portrayed as the villain of the piece, which also happened in the pre-call, so I should have expected it on the panel as well. But by no means is it a race to the bottom at all. The current situation focuses the mind, as Emily mentioned so well, talked about so well on the previous panel, and the BBC, a fantastic publisher as well, taking part in today, talking about the need for quality journalism, and we kind of wholly support that. We've been less showy than some of the other holding groups about our kind of own attempts to work with advertisers and our traders on the whole negative keyword COVID-19 fandango as well, because I heard the holding group mentioned before. We've done that piece. It's sort of typical of us. We don't really talk about it too much, but definitely in the background working to make that happen. We care about the ecosystem. SPO is about caring about the ecosystem. It's when waste and inefficiency are cut out, advertising campaigns work harder, and clients come back and invest more. That's ultimately the benefit of trust, and growing the whole pie for everybody. So supply path optimization is being a responsible buyer. The other thing that I wouldn't make any apology for is that supply path optimization, I'll take the opportunity because we've had a good 2 years with this, building technology and things like that. So it's time for me to use this platform with IAB Europe to hand this over to the wider market. There are smart buyers out there using the information available to them and making gains, and you can gain an unfair competitive advantage from doing supply path optimization. That I recommend everybody on this call today and listening in today start doing for their own benefit. So I would say, beat the average buyer out there and take advantage of the tools available to you to do this.
We're getting a lot of questions about the business of SPO, and we talked about a shorter chain, and the questions also relate to less amount of players. So we got one question here: will publishers need SSPs in the future? Isn't the market working hard to skip at least one of the letters in the acronym, 1D or 1S? And we see, if we look at the industry news, we see now privileged relationships between some agencies and SSPs. We're seeing some DSPs building direct relationships with publishers. How do these kind of industry moves affect the role of SPO and the value that each of the market participants that we have today brings to the table? Who would like to take that audience question?
I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I would give Simon the first chance, but I think that the concept that SSPs are going away is about 5 to 6 years old. I think that was a chat on Twitter that long ago. So appreciate somebody trying to bring it back. But as we've seen the shift from walled gardens, and I think people wanting to move away from said walled gardens because they're not able to get things like transparency and holistic auctions and things like that. I personally don't see the role of an SSP going away, because we need also the independent SSP to provide you with more kind of concrete information. And I think it all goes back to transparency. From what I've heard from most holding companies is that the likes of said walled gardens aren't really willing to provide that transparency. So how do we as an ecosystem make sure that we demand it from everyone? And what do we do as the IAB or the governing body to really demand that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Lisa, just in relation to walled gardens. If we remember sort of the rise of header bidding in 2015, or maybe even slightly earlier in some cases, it was driven primarily by suboptimal ad server setups and the dominance, I guess, of certain walled gardens. And I think the clue is in the name for SPO. So, you know, it is in essence optimizing campaigns on the buy side for the most part. And it's been around for a long time in under a different guise, simply optimizing how line items, how creatives reached their final destination. So consumers on publisher pages. On the question of will SSPs go away, I think I would agree with you, Lisa. You know, as long as an SSP is adding value, they perform a very valuable function today on behalf of publishers, and that goes also for any hop along the supply chain. As long as there is you know, sort of obvious value being created by that participant in the supply chain, then you know there's a role to play for them. Coming back to specifically to sort of SPO and how it relates to I guess that dynamic. You know, there are different categories within this optimization, if you like. For us, one of the major things we try to sort of combat once the sort of the number of hops along the supply chain was clearly increasing through duplication from header bidding, was to sort of explore the deltas that we were beginning to see between first and second price auction environments, and really repair some of the damage that was being done to buy side budgets by that dynamic. We call that product internally, or that service, OPD, or optimal price discovery, and it's essentially, you know, a sort of a micro A/B testing approach at very high scale. In some cases, we'd seen as high as 30% reduction in media cost, if, of course, that is your primary optimization goal as a buyer. Separately, then, so SPO can involve, you know, introducing additional intelligence somewhere in the supply chain to enrich or pre-filter a bid stream before it even reaches a DSP. For us, we call that practice traffic shaping, and it's typically executed with tech that allows you sort of to interrogate in real time the bid request as it comes through, identify, for example, if there's a delay in the response time, which may indicate, for example, it's being resold. You know, so there's very many different categories of SPO that you can apply on the supply chain.
Let's flip it quickly to DPO. We've got some questions on there as well. And one of the beauties, of course, about the programmatic, particularly the open market, was the democratization of access, the democratization of demand and of supply. And here's a question from an anonymous attendee that's asking about DPO. Isn't just if the publisher makes a decision which SSP they want to prioritize, don't they just create a more fragmented market for buyers again? Isn't it just like progressing to the old waterfall model? Simon and Christoph, what do you guys think about that?
Yes, I'll answer that, and then I'll just cover the other question at the same time. Lisa's right. This SSP DSP has been going on for ages about what one's going away, which adds more value. I don't want to oversimplify things, but sometimes you make life so complicated. So back to my original point, we just need to get closer as a publisher to people with unique demand. You know, whether it's an SSP, whether it's an ad network, whether it's a DSP, whoever it is, our job is to create unique demand. The effort and energy, resource and time that is taken internally to onboard a new partner is horrific. We have to put together business cases, we have to go to committees, we have to go through numerous hoops. So to make the wrong decision at the start, onboarding a partner is the worst possible thing. So I'm going to just refer back to when Index and Group N start making these connections, it makes it so hard for us not to have conversations with them. So that's how I would answer that question.
Well, from our perspective, I would say that we just have to follow the market trends. Well, a couple of years ago, when the header bidding was implemented and when it gained popularity, some issues arose that eventually led to the SPO being used at all, right? So some issues were created, and the SSPs had to, the DSPs had to deal with a lot of more impressions, a lot of more ad requests, and at the end of the day, we had to deal with it somehow. So from this perspective, I would say that we just have to do whatever is necessary. Why we did try to work with the header bidding in the first place? Because there was some unique demand, like just Simon mentioned, that there was a unique demand from one of the DSPs that worked better with a specific SSP. So to make it a level playing field, we needed to allow this SSP to be involved in the auction at the same level as all the other SSPs and as the Google's default ad exchange that's implemented in the Google's Ad Manager, which is very commonly used as the ad server. So this was the reason why we had to just move from the waterfall to the header bidding. And now going back to the waterfall is not very reasonable. I would rather think about the SSPs working more closely with the, for example, Google in this case, in the Ad Manager's case. Well, moving from the header bidding to the open bidding, that's kind of a header bidding but done server to server, means that some of the issues might be resolved. Like Lisa said, I believe that we are not going to get rid of the SSPs, but we might see a case of smaller SSPs being acquired or joining efforts because 350 ad exchanges on the market is, from my perspective, way too much of them to be even able to grasp them all, right? So yeah, I believe that we're not going to go away from the header bidding in the foreseeable future, but some exceptions from the general rule might be needed to make it easier for all of us. And Lisa mentioned that when are we all going to implement the SPO or DPO? I believe that we are going to do it whenever all the parties that are involved on the programmatic ecosystem understand that this is the only way to go. Because at the end of the day, we are all benefiting from the transactions. The publishers, the buyers, the agencies, and we are all trying to keep the advertiser as happy as possible for the minimum price, of course, from the perspective of the agency, but also just cutting the chain and making it shorter also means that we are able to get better CPMs, but for each ad request that's generated on the page, because some of the impressions might not be lost in the process. So I believe that we should be looking at this whole process, this whole ecosystem holistically. And at the end of the day, we all want to make the advertiser, the brand, happy.
Right. So we got a lot of questions also around the idea of cost. I mean, we know we are in an ecosystem that is complex, that has been inefficient, that is becoming more efficient through the use of technology, through use of expertise. But if we take out the human costs of human analysts or experts for a second, we know there are a lot of fixed and technical costs being incurred throughout the value chain. We've got one question here that goes back to the notion of QPS, which is asking, would the transparency of QPS cost help publishers and advertisers to understand the impact that inefficiency has on the ecosystem? And then who should pay for that? So there seems to be a question here about showing more sources of inefficiency and then figuring out who pays for that. And Shane, can I play that to you? Because you mentioned some products before that you have available, which I assume also not for free.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on that question specifically, it's a great question because I think ultimately, buyer allocation of budget will always be the single most important factor in the long run, just to understand how our supply chain is impacted. And it's important to understand what the buyer's sort of end goal is. So cheapest impression, yes, it's a relatively straightforward need to satisfy. And usually, you can drive down the cost by, by either exploiting that delta I mentioned in certain hops along the supply chain through machine learning based sort of approaches to really eliminate non-transparent practices within auction dynamics. So if there are hops that don't ostensibly add value, you can just simply remove them. It's not always the case though that removing the number of hops, it's not always as simple as removing hops to get a better result as a buyer. So lowering CPA is a good example of where choosing the correct sort of supply path is not necessarily obvious. So it turns out critical values here are usually conversion rate of the publisher where ads are showing up, combined with using hops along the way that use simple first price auction logic, or sort of simple pass-through logic. So I think it's, as a buyer, it really depends on what your goals are. I think generally for a lot of practices, buyers will look for a clean path where a first price or a simple pass-through logic is what is being used.
We're coming up to the...
Just to add, sorry, can I just add to that? I think that we really love to overcomplicate things. And I think that there's an easy way to do all of this, and being transparent and kind of helping with the education process of it all would help the buyers. Because I think that what Shane is saying, I completely understand, but going to the complexities of it, I think anyone on Tom's team would look at us quite confused. So I think it's about really making sure that we as an industry are able to make what's a complex issue very, very simple and easy to understand. And I think that the more we can be transparent about things like QPS and what that costs a DSP and how that relates to everyone else in the ecosystem, the easier it is. And whether it's a chart or something that's just kind of an easier concept to understand would be helpful. And I think you get back to kind of understanding the value that everyone brings in this chain.
So I actually get ridiculed in my team for bringing up QPS. It's sort of, that's when they start making the geeky glasses at me and mocking me and my team. But I do care about the things that it impacts on Simon's side that I think he was talking about earlier, like in terms of page load and his ability to monetize his inventory, and for the ability for us to reach his audiences, because that can have an impact on all kinds of things like viewability. And of course, we want advertisers, more of advertisers' money to go to authenticated sellers of Simon's inventory, and less of it to fall prey to terrible things like ad fraud and stuff like that. So yeah, we appreciate that there's kind of a whole degree of complexity with it, but then there's a massive amount of kind of benefit if everybody can help each other understand and find the optimal path.
So do we think SPO is here to stay? We're speaking about this very complex market, but it's mainly the OMP display market. Do we think it's going to here to stay if that OMP display market changes, and can and should be applied to other forms of media or programmatic transaction types?
Yeah, I think that. Go ahead, Tom.
No, sorry, I was just going to say this. I think it becomes even more important when the stakes are higher. So I'm aware that what Simon was talking about in terms of onboarding a new supplier is a fantastic risk on his side. That means that he's going to look to monetize his inventory for the best possible price, but he's got to be careful about who he works with. The same exists on our side as well. Onboarding a new supplier from our side is now a multi-step process. You can imagine with the amount that we vet any tech partner we work with these days, it's a sort of huge undertaking in terms of time and resource. So then when you go into the world of like TV and video and the kind of budgets that are at stake there, the importance of supply path optimization as the industry continues to kind of mature into those markets and those channels just becomes even more important, because the sums in play can be so much higher.
See, from my perspective, Tom, listening to you say that, that's something where we can straight away work closer together, because we make very independent decisions. We make decisions on onboarding X piece of technology over Y technology, I can't remember ever picking up the phone and speaking to an agency person properly about it. So that would be a really nice way of connecting the two together.
I'm here for you, Simon.
That's all I wanted to hear.
Yeah, I think that the evolution of SPO, I think it's just going to continue to evolve as the industry evolves. So I think that we're fortunate that our industry moves very quickly. And I think that as we see learnings from either other industries or other markets, we're able to evaluate and quickly accommodate. And I think being nimble is really what's going to be what helps keep us surviving through all of this, and back to the we're better together.
Okay, on that positive note, and we're out of time. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you for your perspectives. Dear audience, thank you for your questions. There are quite a few we weren't able to go through yet, but they won't be left unanswered. Thank you very much again, and I'll pass back to our fantastic host, David Goddard. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And I assume I'm not on mute this time. So all good. Fabulous. And thank you all to the panel as well. I'm sure many will use the knowledge you shared to find their own path to success. Please excuse the pun. But it was a really good panel, really complex subject, well debated. And there are definitely things to be thought of on both sides of the ecosystem from the content you shared. And with that, I recommend keeping your eyes peeled for IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee's guide on SPO that is planned for release later in the year. So keep your eyes peeled. Q3, it's chalked for, so look out for that release next quarter. Now on to our next session. Taking programmatic buying operations in-house has been on the rise, and this trend has been witnessed not only by the data of IAB Europe's annual Attitudes Towards Programmatic survey, but also by the panelists taking part in our next session. Ilona, from the Director of Client Services from the Trade Desk, will lead the next panel of experts into a discussion, to explore the in-housing trend. Hello, Ilona, are you on the line?
Hi, David. Thank you so much.
And another fantastic background, I must say.
Yes, I've heard that the weather in London today isn't great, so I thought I may as well put some sunny background. And also, I'm stuck in in Poland at my parents' place. I wasn't able to go back to London after traveling, so I wanted to save you views of my childhood's bedroom. And thought I will put a background to cover that up.
You've certainly upstaged Daniel Knapp, but I'll hand over to you now for good luck with the next panel. Looking forward to listening to it.
Thank you so much, David. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around. I believe this is the last session of today, and we do have a very exciting subject to go through, the in-housing of programmatic trading. And my name is Ilona Lubodziemska, and I work for the Trade Desk. I look after client services teams in the UK and France. And I'm absolutely honored to be joined today by the amazing panelists representing brands. We've got Vodafone Italy, we've got HelloFresh on the stage with us today. We also have agencies, we've got Mediacom and technology partner. We've got Xander with us as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the panelists' thoughts on in-housing programmatic trading and what they make of it. Because as David said, there has been a lot in the press over the past several months about in-housing and being more and more brands out there thinking and bringing programmatic buying into their organizations. Some of them, as we know, have done it successfully, Vodafone being one great example, and other brands perhaps struggled with that a little bit. And I would love to sort of understand panelists from the panelists today and hear their thoughts and perhaps also experiences on going through that process and experiencing some of that firsthand. Before we will start the discussion, I would love the panelists to introduce themselves and tell us about their roles, where they work, and perhaps where they are dialing in from today. Let's start with Stephanie, then Carlotta, and then we will go over to Oliver, Laird, and Tash.
Hi everyone, hello, how are you? I'm Carlotta Meneghini from Vodafone Italy. I'm responsible for all activities across products for Vodafone Italian market, and I'm responsible for programmatic.
Stephanie?
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm dialing in from Hamburg. I work at Xandr. Generally, we have a SSP, DSP, and an ad server for publishers. I work on the DSP team, and we're providing trading advisory help to our buy-side clients, mostly agencies, but also some direct marketers. And yeah, we're located here in beautiful Hamburg at the moment.
Welcome. Oliver.
Hello, I'm Oliver Gertz. I'm leading digital across EMEA for Mediacom, which is the biggest media agency in Europe. And I work with clients on evolving their digital capabilities and how that means evolving how they approach programmatic and take more control as part of that role.
Laird.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Lars Saliai. I work as Martech lead in Vodafone Italy. I work in the digital marketing team as my main roles are to work with different technological partners to onboard in the best way and use the technology that they offer in the best way for the Vodafone purposes or goals.
Thank you so much. And Tushar?
Hi, my name is Tushar. I'm responsible for all the global ads programmatically run by HelloFresh. Yes.
Welcome. Thank you so much for the introductions. Let's start perhaps with talking a little bit about in-housing itself and what does in-housing actually mean to you. And we do have, obviously, as I mentioned, Vodafone and HelloFresh on the line. And I think it will be amazing to understand how brands view in-housing and what in-housing means to them, whether there is one size fits all. Tash, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Programmatic in-house, it means to me, is like taking ownership of your data, technology contracts, media, and hello?
We're still here.
Oh, sorry. Taking ownership of data, technology contracts, audience planning, algorithms, and analytics, and bending them to marketing ROIs and kind of looking towards, looking at the customer lifetime value. However, in market, in industry, there are three levels of intermediation available when brands are looking for in-house programmatic. So first one is like working with agency in an opt-in model or an opt-out model where the planning and sourcing of the technology has been provided by the agency, but in terms of data, it can still be lied with the advertiser itself. Second is when you can go via a reseller. Reseller is like something like Jellyfish, Mighty Hive, where they kind of outsource you the technology and also outsource you the talent, which can sit in your office, and it can be both like in terms of paper or how you want to like how it works for your marketing team. And third is like direct, which I call it fully programmatic, where you take ownership of your contracts, operations, data, media, algorithm, and analytics.
Amazing. So it seems like there are multiple approaches that brand could take, sort of assessing in-housing programmatic. We also have on the line Laird, who represents obviously Vodafone Italy, and Vodafone is one of those brands that have brought programmatic buying in-house successfully. It would be great, Laird, if you could share with us what does in-housing mean to you.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. From Vodafone's point of view, the in-housing of programmatic and all the digital media buying take place through data place through a buying platform managed by campaign managers such as Google Ads, Facebook, DV360, for Vodafone was a step forward toward the digital transformation process. Everything started with a digital transformation process. The most important thing to underline is that it's not about just digital media or something related to marketing. But it was a change of mindset to embrace globally, that was embraced globally by top management that constantly followed the process of each country toward 100% of the in-housing. This in-housing process lead Vodafone to contract directly with the main technological partner, the tech partners, without, in this case, the help of the agency. The agency still continue to remain our best partner, absolutely, and we continue to be seated at the same table, thanks also to an agile methodology. Actually, we all are in a call from everyone from each home, but we are virtually the same themes. This helped us to promote a lot of transparency and optimize the execution time of our campaigns. To give you an example, we are able to change more than 100 ads in edge buying platform with a new creative message in less than 24 hours. Just to sum up, currently in the programmatic in-housing process, we are in a co-collaboration situation with the agency. Vodafone Peoples defined the entry strategy and is responsible for the channel, while the agency is responsible for the running of campaigns.
Amazing. So it seems like all the partners are still participating in the programmatic buying in some one way or another. Perhaps the dynamic is changing a little bit. Stephanie, it would be great to also get your thoughts from a tech partner, what in-housing means to you, and how those relationships perhaps change.
Yeah, I think in-housing really starts with brands taking more ownership of the decisions and being more educated about how things are executed and how they align with their internal operations. I think one of the driver, we already heard, analytics and data is very relevant for brands to decide how to make more out of the marketing function, becoming more important for business strategy in general. As a tech provider, we try to enable all different business models. So we like to work with direct marketers, we like to work with agencies. What we're seeing is more like a hybrid approach to in-housing. So nobody really, or not nobody, but most brands are like starting off on a journey, but they do see some value in outsourcing certain services and in-housing other services. It's just this whole decision process is more intense, like it's more controlled right now. It used to be kind of like, we trust the agency, we hand everything over, and now there is more of a strategic approach. Which parts do we want to keep control of, such as procurement for like global contracts in the tech landscape, and which part of the workflow do we want to keep outsourced? A lot of times, automation intense tasks, or also tasks that require a lot of education, where agencies still have just like a broader pool of talent. What we see is that as brands are like starting to do the in-housing, as they like increase the budgets for their branding, not just like the budgets that marketing can spend, but the budgets that the marketing team has for employees, we're just getting more interesting use cases. We're talking about more customized setups, and we're kind of like departing from that one size fits all solution. We're getting more to like personalized plans, and I think that's a good thing for the brands that go on that journey. And it's an opportunity for players in the industry to support that innovation and that individual media buying, kind of like strategy building.
Yeah, so it's like you said, it's kind of in-housing. It seems to be all about finding that sweet spot between all these different players within our industry and sort of finding a way that we can all sort of contribute towards making that a success. Obviously, as I mentioned, and David as well, we do hear about the increase between brands wanting to bring in-housing in-house. And I just wonder whether all the articles that are obviously available online and the numbers that are showing the increase of CMOs sort of thinking about bringing programmatic buying into their organizations is real, whether that trend it's something that we should sort of be looking into, or whether that's a little bit of a myth. And I would love Oliver to give his perspective on it.
Well, I think it's both. It's real in the sense, as we have heard, that advertisers want to take more control. As biddable media is more a dialogue with the consumer, you don't want to outsource that in the same way as you're outsourcing buying reach on TV. At the same time, there's a lot of a miss, because when people say in-housing, it sounds like the advertisers doing everything themselves. That is true for some direct-to-consumer brands where customer acquisition online is their core business process. But as we have heard, in many cases, agencies and other service partners still play a big role. And obviously, sometimes it's a little bit of vanity game. So it's great to stand on stage and say we are in-housing programmatic, but then when you do a LinkedIn search, for example, you say, well, apparently without any staff, because there are no programmatic or very few programmatic people in your business. But I think the role of the agency is evolving, and actually what we see that our programmatic revenue as fee revenue is still growing very much rather than shrinking. So I don't think it's a threat to the agency business as such, but it's evolving what we do for clients.
Amazing, thanks so much, Oliver. What about you, Stephanie?
Yeah, I think it is fair to say that there have been a lot of tests over the last couple of years. There has been a lot of momentum to, as I said, like try out what is sensible in terms of in-housing, where efficiency can be created. But I wouldn't say that this is like a continuous trend and where you're seeing like a shift and it's just a matter of time until everybody is in-house. As I said, I see more the hybrid model where you're kind of like taking the best of both. You're building up in-house capabilities, but you're also leveraging outside expertise is really gaining traction over the last couple of years. And I do think that there is, we already heard the direct-to-consumer brands being a bit of a differentiator. There are certain industries that are more likely to go strong on in-housing. We noticed, for example, something like the gaming industry, which is very heavy on data, has very like specific different attribution models based to not like standard like last click stuff, is more prone to doing like in-housing. We know that some cost sensitive industries are also maybe like more looking to just like keep expenses low. So I think there's not an answer that fits everyone, but there are some trends in the different verticals. Mm-hmm. And overall, I would say that the more you have a multi-channel marketing operation, the more you actually like want to harmonize stuff. And for execution across multiple geos and stuff, it's always useful to have support of on-the-ground specialists. So I think it's definitely like the global brands, obviously they are in-housing, but they're also leveraging there's expertise on the ground in the different markets to really be quick in execution. And at times like these, obviously, in-housing is a bit of a bigger risk because you still have all the costs running. Obviously, the agencies maybe don't like to hear that, but you have a bit more flexibility when you're outsourcing to also like cut costs according to business cycles. And it's something that that is relevant for industries that are very closely related to crisis.
For sure. I think also, I don't know whether you agree, but I think obviously brands, and I would love to hear from brands as well whether they agree. But I believe obviously as the spend in programmatic are increasing, brands wants to just understand what programmatic really means and how can they play a role and understand a little bit better what's happening with the dollars that they are spending. So like you said, Stephanie, and also Oliver, I think it's all about sort of gaining knowledge and understanding across the programmatic industry, and sort of being able to make more educated decisions together with the other players. But with that trend, Oliver, I would love to hear, agencies used to play and still play a very important role when it comes to media buying, media planning, strategizing. And with that trend sort of increasing, I would love to kind of hear from your perspective, how agencies are reacting to it. Do they see the increasing in-housing as a threat or an opportunity perhaps?
If I'm honest, we see both, but I think if we do it well, it's more an opportunity. The first step is education, as you say. I think often the main motivation for in-housing is building understanding. And so the first thing that we do with clients is show them what it means, bring them into the building, let them sit next to the operators, go through the life cycle of a campaign to really understand what is happening. The second thing then that clients usually want to take control of or be much more involved is in the strategy, so that they understand, how do I define my audiences, how do I define my optimization strategy, how do I select my inventory, and how do I drive results. That is highly linked to analytics, so really understanding what's going on. If clients say it's a black box, often that is more the lack of education or the lack of analytical resource to really see what's possible, because we, for example, give clients access to the DSP reports, but they might be overwhelming at some stage. And I think then if clients decide that they want to take more of the hands-on execution in-house, we still can support them with training, with outside in. I think one of the main benefits that an agency can bring is that we work across industries, we work across markets, and we work across technologies. So a lot of the learning and a lot of the mistakes are spread across many clients, and a good agency is really good in bringing that knowledge to their clients so that the risk and the waste for each client is much lower.
Amazing, thanks so much. So yeah, and again, it's all about sort of, I think, understanding and sort of really giving brands the opportunity to see, the different roles that we are all playing, and that sometimes, it's not, everything is not as straightforward as it may seem. So I think that visibility, it's quite key. And
maybe to build on that, what we've seen in search, for example, which is a couple of years ahead, we're seeing now more big advertisers outsourcing their search again after they have insourced it, but now they really know what good search looks like. They still keep that knowledge and that competence within their own organization, but they also understand what benefit exists, for example, as Stephanie says, having a local search specialist in every market so that your copy and your keyword selection is just much better. And that's what agencies can provide at much lower cost, because you can hire the 10% search specialist in a country rather than 100 or 0.
Absolutely, and also it's that scale that that is also important. Executing that on a global level efficiently may prove quite tricky. But that's a really nice segue, I suppose, to understanding really how brands are assessing bringing programmatic in-house. Like, what are the elements that brands are sort of reviewing before they decide to make that big move and bring programmatic operations into their organizations, whether this is the whole of programmatic or perhaps only parts of it. And I think it would be fantastic to get HelloFresh and Tash to tell a little bit more about that, perhaps.
Sure. I think it's totally depends on your level of expertise and the level of your organization and how you are looking at programmatic. If you are looking at programmatic from a very ROI point of view, then it makes really sense to kind of, get it in-house and then use analytics and use data science algorithms and different sets of things you want to use. But if you're looking for more of a awareness or a brand, like, because programmatic is a way of buying, you're looking for the upper funnels like video, or you're looking for, let's say, doing OOH now or radio, then I think it makes more sense, like to work with the agencies, because they have more understanding of, planning of video and planning of radio, where it is not more driven by ROI. So yeah, that's what I think.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Carlotta, what about you from Vodafone's perspective?
Carlotta, you're on mute.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, well, I think it's depend on how much the company wants to have a specific control on delivery, transparency, cost, results. So for our perspective, the most important thing to bring in a house was the strategy, and then the operation as the buying or the trafficking or the campaign management or something like this.
Amazing. Stephanie, would you have also thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the reasons that brands are using for the in-housing, a lot of times we also see transparency as a big topic. Mm-hmm. And once again, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do all buying in-house, but really getting more insights into the supply chain. We've heard it before in the round previously, which was talking about SPO and other things. Like, there's more demand about understanding really how the marketing budget that is being spent kind of like separates into different cost types. So you have the media costs, and the assumption always seems to be that all the money goes to the publishers. Now, unfortunately for our publishers, that's not entirely the case. There's cost going into data, into analytics. There's costs going into just like operational efficiency. And I think just like getting a better picture of that situation is what just Oliver also described, the process that the search industry went through. I think it is very useful to get a better understanding of the different components and of the work that is required to do this job. And then with that knowledge, you can once again possibly scope for ideal partners that can support you. But just from a more educated perspective and with more certainty that you're taking the right decisions based on the right data. And I think it's very difficult to build that knowledge without getting your hands dirty somewhere around the like on the path. But also I would say that it is a significant investment in terms of the hiring that you have to do. It's very difficult to start off in-house operations from scratch. It's very difficult to get the internal support for those teams to be really connected to the analytics team, to the other like tech teams and stuff. And we often see companies that start like drastically in-housing programmatic spending, suddenly realizing there's some digitalization like challenges that the business as a whole hasn't addressed. So suddenly the marketing department starts asking about certain data access questions, and they realize the data systems are not compatible to activate like CRM data for marketing purposes and stuff. So it can really kick off a whole transformation process that affects different business units. So once you get started, like you often find out there's more to the challenge than you were thinking at first.
Yeah, definitely. And the piece around finding the right talent is in particular, I think, something that organizations often don't realize until they have to hire big teams, knowledgeable teams to run programmatic buying. And there is still a scarce of programmatic talent, I believe, in our industry. But also like the innovation, Stephanie, as you said, I think that's something that's quite important. Technology moves so fast and so quickly, and I think agencies obviously are so well positioned to assess all these different players and advise often on you know what those players are capable of, test them, and then obviously help brands with making those decisions. And Oliver, I'm also curious to understand, I'm sure that you are participating in a lot of conversations with brands. and sort of helping them decide what parts to bring in-house and what not. What are your thoughts on sort of having brands assess all these different areas? How do they do it? How do they do it? And what questions do they come with to you when they go through that process? You're on mute as well.
Sorry. Very often, the discussion really starts with, we want to in-house because somehow I read in the press that that's what I should do. And then we try to bring the discussion back to say, so what is the role of display and video and native for your brand? And how can programmatic make that more effective? And what is needed to really drive that forward? And I think some of the topics we've heard this morning are very important, and that's where suddenly clients start to realize that some of the overheads that they're always complaining about when they look at agency fees are actually spent on things that are very expensive to do in-house. For example, contracts with tech vendors. Signing a contract with Google, really not fun. Data protection agreements, inventory sourcing, and knowing how to navigate supply. Usually agencies get you much better rates and they get you much better quality because they can do that at scale. But I think the biggest challenge that in-house teams have is talent and talent development. So yes, it's very easy to get people excited to say, do you want to work in-house, be much closer to the marketing team, really push one brand forward? But what we see is it's very hard to keep those people on a career progression. They miss the knowledge that they get from their peers working on other clients, working on other markets, and they really sometimes struggle to see how in such much smaller team they can do the next move. And so I see that this will be a dynamic process, and there will be moving in and out as well. And then I think in the end of the day, we will see that agencies will be very good in defining the value proposition that they have, and clients will be much smarter in defining where do they want help, where do they want to do it themselves, where do they want to outsource. But when they outsource, it will not be a model anymore where they hand it over to someone and they don't understand what that someone does.
Amazing. And as we were chatting about that, we had a poll and we asked the audience, brands in particular, to tell us how do they go about in-housing or programmatic trading. And we've got the results. I'm going to read them out. 11% outsource of brands outsource all programmatic buying. 38% keeps the strategy or brings the strategy and analytics in-house, but outsource the execution of programmatic trading. 40% undertakes trading execution in-house, but is looking or seeking best practice support from agency or consultancy. So that's the highest out of all the votes. And then 11% undertakes all programmatic buying in-house without any external help. So just wanted to share those results with you as well. And with the changing of dynamics and how all the different players, so brands and agencies and tech partners start to interact with each other, I wonder what does that mean for the future of the agency and the advertiser relationship? Tash, would you be able to speak to that, please?
Sure. I think agencies are always, ones who innovate and ones who kind of come up with new solutions on board for the advertisers. So I think they will be one of them. So the relationship is going to be really strong. But as you just said, the poll you saw, there's an 11% raise, like now people are doing everything in-house without taking any external help. If you ask me, like 2 years back, that was 0. Okay, now it's 11% and it's going more up and up like in the recent times. Why is that in cases that because, right now, most of the companies are centralizing their programmatic and they have a lot of internal analytics helps. And programmatic is not something which, you need a lot of brand awareness, which agencies kind of have like a say on it, where how many frequency, how many reach, because when you look at programmatic, it's mostly on the lower funnel, which is like performance, where it doesn't matter where it is reach or where it is performance or where it is brand safety. It is obviously likability and suitability of a brand, but usually it's a really a less combination. But I think more and more advertisers, to reach at an advanced level, they would have to go via agency. They would have to go via reseller, because they would need hand holding. So I think the relationship will stay strong. It's a very win-win situation, but it would be never like 100%. So as like Oliver also said, that how well they do it, that would be also a variable to see that how well they kind of help advertisers to build them up, and what kind of relationship they build over the years.
Amazing. Oliver, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would just say brand safety and fraud is also very important on the lower funnel. And I don't think programmatic is lower funnel only. Actually, I see some of the biggest value opportunities in the upper funnel when it comes to things like viewability, when it comes to exposure duration or video completion, because machines can optimize that better than humans. But it's true, the analytics part is really important. And I think the more an advertiser has own data and has analytics that goes beyond media analytics, the more that needs to be integrated. And if it is the old agency model where you send a brief to the agency and you get a PowerPoint back that you might not even understand, that doesn't work. So that's why we see companies like Vodafone or HelloFresh, which are very dynamic, very competitive environments, and where there's a lot of data. For them, there's a different setup that is ideal versus, let's say, an automotive manufacturer or FMCG. And the agencies, I think, historically have been very good in adapting to changing client requests and figuring out a way how they can add value.
Amazing. And as we are talking about that relationship between agencies and brands and sort of how that's changing and evolving, I'm also interested to hear whether that shift in dynamics and how is that shift in dynamics really affecting relationships between not only agencies and brands, but also brands and tech partners. And I'm wondering whether Lars could speak to that and give his perspective.
Yeah, thank you. I think that the absence of intermediaries has allowed the tech partners to have a direct contact with the brand, giving to them an extra chance to offer its own technology before they pass it typically through the agency review. Obviously, the relationship with the tech giants like Google or Facebook, for example, were present even before. But thanks to the in-housing process, we as Vodafone have now the right people and the right resource, also budgets, to better understand what technology can work best for our needs, for the needs of Vodafone. Because as an internal employer, we know very well the full chain of value in Vodafone, how customers engage on each step of the onboarding process, for example. Just to give two examples and how the relationship with the partner changed. We started working with a startup based in Poland, just was a LinkedIn contact, that now allow us to do some parts of the marketing automation process. As well as we detected a problem regarding how leads are managed with different publishers. And with understanding well the problem, we asked to our ET department to develop some APIs, and then we give this API to tech partners and different publishers. For example, new kind of publisher that appeared these years, like conversational messaging, for example. We give them this API for lead generation and with the capacity to have a real-time quality check of the leads.
Stephanie, how do you what are your thoughts on that change in dynamic?
Yeah, I think there are like two perspectives on this matter. I think one is that some of the demands that initially would probably hit an agency are now hitting technology partners, and we've tried to respond to that by, for example, like helping our customers like hedge their risk by providing outcome-based buying products, which normally that risk would be taken by an agency. And it's much easier when you're a big buyer and you know a lot of what's going on in the market to kind of like do these predictions. But as a platform, obviously, we have also access to a lot of relevant data. So we're trying to make access to these kind of tools like more democratized and like not dependent on your budget that you're spending. And I think another thing that we're seeing is that as brands are taking more control of the partnerships they're having, there's obviously a lot more sets of partnerships that get put on our table. So an agency might consolidate between, 5 different scenarios that they're recommending to their clients, but brands themselves might come up with a much bigger diversity in combining certain partners. So we're very much focusing also on integrating all the necessary partners into like an open ecosystem. So one of the important trends here is if you're not one of the walled gardens, you're really trying to also allow for these connections to be open, to bring data providers on your platform, to allow for specialists in analytics to execute on your platform and kind of like to really empower that choice that a brand has made. And I think for us, it's a great opportunity to get more diversity of partners that we're working with, and also to expand our knowledge about all the different products they're having and how they're adding value to their clients.
Absolutely, and I can also add to this from my perspective, obviously working for a technology company that isn't a walled garden, and like you said, the ability for us being open and having sort of a marketplace approach gives brands the opportunity to utilize various technologies offering out there, test them, and I do think that agencies play an important role in helping often shed a little bit of light in terms of what can work best for brands based on the experience they do have, because they've been obviously around for a very long time and they have teams dedicated often to help us tailor best solutions. I think we are quite close to the end, and I think we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. And I've got one last question, which I think will nicely summarize this session. And I would love to hear from all of you. If you had an advice for a brand, so what do brands need to do to make in-housing more successful? If there is one thing you would change or do differently, what would that be? Let's start with Carlotta.
Well, I think the successful depend on 2 key factors, people and technology. You have to collaborate with the best technology in your local market, not just the global, but your local market, and to hire the good mix of people that contaminate each other's. So you can create a very good mix in terms of teams. And if I have to change something, probably is that I will not separate the digital performance from digital brand. And I would create a global digital hub that includes digital sales, digital performance, digital brand, etc.
Amazing. Laird?
Yeah, for me, the most important thing absolutely is the hire the right people. This is very, very important because it's in housing programming, not just hiring through campaign managers. After after a year, you will realize that it was better with the agency. So hiring the right people is very important. In housing, programmatic, but others tech platforms means that you are getting in your company a lot of data, a lot of information that you also have to get help from other departments that you have to unify this data internally for marketing, for sales, for delivery, for every department. It's very, very important. So you have to build also an infrastructure that's help to optimize to buying side, off-site, but also get a lot of insight for the on-site, but also for other departments.
Tash?
I think what would I like to change is that I want to change this phenomena of programmatic just performance and display and native. Actually, one thing if I want to change is that, I want to change that programmatic is the way of buying. It's more data driven. You can buy like say CTV, OTTs, radio and OOH. So I think if I could change, I would change this thing that when you're moving in-house, also think about other upper funnel channels, not just like lower funnel display and native.
Definitely. And Oliver?
Yes, I think the success really is depending on openness and willingness to learn. And I think then it's a journey. And what we see is now very different models, how we work with clients. It's also openness on both sides. So sometimes agency people are embedded with client teams. We also have clients that embed their people with our teams. And I think in that relationship, then there's a constant shift of who does what based on what are the needs and how they evolve. But one very important thing is make sure that you get outside in, that you really are not cut off from the developments on the technology side, on the marketplace, new risks coming, because it's very easy to be in your little in-house silo and believe you're doing an amazing job, but you're doing an amazing job versus a year ago, but not versus the industry that has moved on.
Exactly. And Stephanie?
Yeah, I would say the thing about like hiring the best of the right people is super crucial, and also not just hiring them, but having a mid-long-term plan in place. We've heard before that a lot of times, like this seems like a great opportunity. 1-2 years in, people are starting to ask questions about progression, opportunities and stuff. So also like think about how you can get this top talent like to stay in your company for more than the short term. And on the other hand, I think once you're working more directly with partners, it requires a different level of openness. So you have to be a bit more forthcoming about discussing challenges that you're having, because that's the best way to resolve them. So it's not necessarily something that comes natural to a lot of companies to go to partners and say, like, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. But that's really the most effective way to resolve issues. And I think it's a bit of a mindset change a lot of times compared to previous ways of working with partners.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And so just to sort of sum up, I think that what I'm hearing and the sort of main takeaways of today's in-housing sessions are definitely around the fact that there is no one size fits all. There are certainly lots of various different approaches that a brand can take, but I think the most important thing is the openness and conversations that Oliver mentioned, hiring the right people, sort of being innovative, seeking advice from agencies and tech partners, coming to the table together. And obviously it's important not to forget about the importance of data that can help us buy smarter, certainly. Thank you so much for the panel and participating and giving all your thoughts and sharing your experience with us today. David, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just uncover my video. Thank you very much, Ilona. And thank you all to all the panelists. This has clearly been a topic of interest to the industry. So The sharing of your experience and expertise on in-housing would have been greatly appreciated by many. So thank you again. Well, we're almost at the end of the 2020 H1 Virtual Programmatic Day, and what an event it has been. Fully virtual, and we have also both set a record in sign-ups and attendance with over 1,000 attendees dialing into the event, which is incredible given the current circumstances. I'm also sure that a number of the attendees may have been higher than we counted, as during this time it's not uncommon to have small children sitting on parents' laps in working hours. I know I have throughout this this lockdown. So you never know, we may have inspired the next wave of thought leaders in our industry. I would also like to thank all our panelists and moderators for giving up their time, sharing their knowledge and views on the important topics that were discussed and debated today. I'm sure many of our attendees will have taken an idea or more away with them that can be used to improve their own business. And I'd also like to especially thank Marie-Claire Parfait and Helen Massard from IAB Europe, who have worked tirelessly to pull this event together and deliver this Virtual Programmatic Day, despite the challenges we've faced. And finally, thank you to all of you, the attendees, for tuning in. Without your support and interest, we wouldn't have a Virtual Programmatic Day. So if you could take a couple of minutes to provide your feedback in a short survey at the end of the event, it would be very much appreciated. The event recording will be available on IAB Europe's website over the next few days. IAB Europe has a lot of other resources related to programmatic, from white papers, guides to one-on-one videos. So check out the Knowledge Hub on iabeurope.eu. And the next Virtual Programmatic Day will take place in November, so keep your eye out for more information. As mentioned at the beginning of the event, all our speakers are from IAB Europe member companies. IAB Europe is the leading European level association for the digital marketing and advertising ecosystem and represents national IABs, media, technology and marketing companies to lead political representation, industry collaboration and deliver framework standards and industry programs to enable the digital advertising business to thrive in the European market. Our members span the entire digital advertising marketing ecosystem, from publishers, DSPs, SSPs and to agencies. And it really is an opportunity to meet, network and create great working relationships with leaders from across Europe. If you would like to find out more about our membership or IAB Europe's membership, please contact Charlie or Helen. Their details are on screen. And finally, IAB Europe has a range of other upcoming virtual events and webinars, namely IAB Europe's flagship event, Interact, will be virtual this year on the 3rd of June. Interact Online is a free-to-attend virtual conference with expert speakers including senior executives from Coca-Cola, Zalando, Google, ProSieben, RTL, Publicis Media, Group M and OMD. The IAB Europe team will include more details on membership and Interact in today's event follow-up. Thank you one last time. It's been an absolute pleasure moderating today's. Again, thank you to all the attendees, all of you dialing in, and panelists and moderators. Thanks again and stay safe.